each and every one for those that put in a submission prior to August 15th, and we look forward to your remarks this morning. All the submissions are on our units, our iPads, I guess, so people will be referring to those from time to time. So to start, former colleague Sergio Marchi with the Canadian Electrical Association. Welcome, Sergio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and to the members for the opportunity to address your committee. Reliable electricity has become indispensable to a competitive economy and a high quality of life. Moreover, our sector is over 80% GHG free, making it one of the cleanest sectors in the world. But we're not done yet, as electricity can help further power Canada's clean energy transition through the electrification of other industrial processes. However, electrifying the Canadian economy will neither be easy or cheap. The Conference Board of Canada estimates that our sector's electrification will need an investment of $1.6 trillion by 2050 if we are to meet Canada's climate and clean growth objective. On behalf of our members, our pre-budget submission offered 4 specific program recommendations and 2 broad policy recommendations that we hope will be addressed by Budget 2019. To recap, and as it relates to the former, 1. Recapitalize oversubscribed NRCan funding programs. 2. Allocate funding for a zero-emissions vehicle strategy. 3. Expand investments in northern energy infrastructure. And 4. Allocate funding for the development of a national electrification strategy. With respect to the 2 more macro proposals, 1. If we are to attract clean energy investment and for our companies to sustain their health and viability, Canada must ensure a competitive fiscal environment, and we're pleased, Mr. Chairman, that the theme for the upcoming budget will focus on competitiveness and growing the economy. And 2, Canada's burdensome regulatory environment must be urgently addressed, as it has become dangerously heavy and remains uncoordinated between the 3 senior levels of government. Mr. Chairman, I believe that Canada's business sectors are united in expressing concerns regarding the current Canadian investment climate. These concerns stem in part from a growing competitiveness divide with the U.S. and an uncertain regulatory process for approving large capital projects in the country. This climate is also exacerbated by the uncertainty surrounding the NAFTA negotiations and the imposition of various U.S. trade protectionist measures. Obviously, this also impacts our sector. For example, this year, 7 of the top 10 largest infrastructure projects come from the electricity sector. As well, our members are also investing some $20 billion annually towards renewing our aging infrastructure. And every single cent of these monies must be approved by the regulator, and therein lies the political risk. For this energy transition and for positioning Canada to be a global clean energy leader, it will require additional and sustained investments from the federal government in both infrastructure and innovation support mechanisms. In this regard, while electricity is provincially regulated, the federal government does play a significant role in its development, since some 34 federal departments and/or agencies are involved in the electricity space. That's one reason we need governments to complete the Canadian energy strategy, so we can strategically leverage all of our energy assets for the benefits of all Canadians in all regions. In closing, the work of nation building, as you know, never stops, because building transformative and resilient infrastructure is our obligation to the next generation. Throughout our history, we have met this challenge. Think of the great railroads of the 19th century, the highways, seaway, and broadcasting systems of the 20th, or the Canadian arm that extended mankind's reach into space. These transformative accomplishments, I would suggest, were all made possible because Canadians knew the importance of thinking ahead. It is now imperative that governments work together make wise investments, and earn the trust of Canadians and industry if we are to succeed in another great moment of transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Turning to the Canadian Gas Association, Mr. Egan, President and CEO, and Mr. Chiliak, Vice President. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. By way of introduction, the Canadian Gas Association is the voice of Canada's natural gas delivery industry. We deliver natural gas to over 7 million customer locations. That's homes, businesses, and industry right across the country. And each location is a meter reaching many people, and by our estimate, well over 20 million Canadians currently benefit from affordable, clean burning and safe natural gas. We provided a map where you can see the Canadian Natural Gas Distribution Service area. All members of the committee should have a copy. In 2017, natural gas met 34% of Canada's energy needs, over a third of all energy end use, a number that has grown by 28% since 2007. And growth is expected to continue. The National Energy Board forecasts natural gas will become the largest energy source in Canada by 2040 at approximately 40% of end use. The Government of Canada has made competitiveness its 2019 budget priority, and in order to deliver on a more competitive country, our homes, businesses and industry require expanded and innovative access to clean, reliable and affordable natural gas. We include some graphics to showcase the affordability of the product for you. Chart 1, delivered energy costs, shows how natural gas has been less than 50% of the cost of other energy sources consistently since 2005. And Chart 2, annual home heating costs, shows how a Canadian home using natural gas can save between $1,000 and $2,500 per year over other fuel choices. Competitiveness turns on energy affordability, and natural gas is consistently Canada's affordable fuel option. So we do a lot, but the Government of Canada says do more. And what more can we do? We offer 6 recommendations where natural gas and our infrastructure can help improve Canadian competitiveness. First, we propose a $750 million federal renewable gas innovation program to support the production and blending of renewable gases in the gas pipeline system. We propose a program with a 6-year duration to be managed by Natural Resources Canada and CanMed Energy to support projects and technologies including renewable natural gas like landfill methane and hydrogen. It should be noted that these are fuel supplies that can be blended directly into the existing gas infrastructure system. No new infrastructure is required. The goal would be to get a 5% renewable gas portfolio into the Canadian pipeline system by 2030, delivering up to 14 megatons of additional GHG emissions reductions. Project funding would cover up to 1/3 of total project cost, provided either via a production incentive, a capital cost contribution, or some hybrid option. Finally, most importantly, the program would support the natural gas industry in meeting federally imposed emission reduction targets, such as those proposed under a clean fuel standard. Second, we would propose a fund of $450 million to connect rural and remote Canadians to natural gas. Well over a third of Canadians do not currently have access to the gas distribution network, and they depend on more expensive energy supplies. CGA has heard from many members of Parliament on all sides of the House, particularly those in rural areas, that their constituents have concerns about high energy prices. CGA has developed a proposal to address rural Canada's unique energy needs, and we're happy to make this available to all those interested. It builds on many past precedents to deliver key energy infrastructure to Canadians. Third, measures to expand the use of natural gas as a transportation fuel. CGA has been working closely with Transport Canada and Natural Resources Canada to advance this area. Natural gas vehicles are a solution to Canada's freight emissions challenge, providing up to 25% reductions in GHG emissions and lower commodity costs. We recognize the important federal support provided in Budgets 2016 and 17 to support low-emission refueling infrastructure, including natural gas. But looking forward, we see a role for government working with industry in 3 areas: to defray higher upfront costs associated with the acquisition of natural gas-powered vehicles, to support additional development of public access refueling infrastructure, and to support NGV implementation projects, including facility upgrades required to promote workplace safety. Fourth, we focus on creating a natural gas clean tech innovation fund for Canada by leveraging the work we're already doing in the industry through our own natural gas innovation fund created in October of 2015. Our NGIF partner partners with gas utilities and with Canadian and international clean tech companies that bring solutions to challenges facing our industry. CGA has been working closely with Enercan's Office of Energy Research and Development, the Office of Energy Efficiency, and CanMed Energy by building a trusted partnership where we share information and project funding opportunities. This is a unique arrangement in Canada. Building on the work we've started, we proposed the allocation of $300 million over 6 years to support clean technology commercialization in our industry. The fund would have 5 distinct technology categories along the full natural gas value chain: methane venting and fugitive emissions, heat and power generation, renewable gases, CO2 capture, and capture, utilization and storage, and LNG. The fund would address the full value chain of natural gas clean tech needs, including production, transmission, distribution, and consumption. Fifth, cybersecurity, a growing area of importance for the energy sector at large and for CGA and our member companies. We recommend the federal government continue to support collaborative opportunities between the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and the private sector to share skills and knowledge and enhance risk management in cybersecurity. And sixth, a focus on the needs of the energy consumer. As Canadian federal and provincial legislators and regulators look at ways to achieve GHG emission reduction targets, we recommend that there be a public and transparent accounting of the costs involved in achieving those targets. No single government is looking at the total cost to the Canadian energy consumer, but rather at their individual piece. And moving forward, our recommendation is to address the situation, to start addressing the situation with an annual joint meeting of Energy and Mines Ministers and Environment Ministers to discuss regulatory overlap and the consumer impact. In conclusion, we know natural gas is well positioned to support the government's objectives. We're working hard to help. Our Natural Gas Innovation Fund is an example where our industry is actively pursuing the development of new technologies to build on the value proposition of our product. We encourage consideration of our recommendations in moving forward to do more still if the government wishes to meet the targets it has set. Thank you for the opportunity today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Then turning to the Fisheries Council of Canada, Mr. Lansbergen.
Thank you, Chair and honourable members. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. The Fisheries Council of Canada, or FCC for short, is the national voice for the wild capture sector, representing processors on all 3 coasts and inland waters, and many of our members also harvest. In our submission, we highlighted 4 issues: restoring investment confidence, fund science-based decision-making, expand trade and market opportunities, and address labour shortages. However, for my remarks this morning, I'm going to focus on the first recommendation. Without action on it, the others are less of a concern because the first holds primacy. Instability of access to the resource and policy uncertainty have eroded the confidence to invest in equipment, new technologies, and conservation. Without that investment, we won't grow, innovate, or create employment. And there are 3 reasons for this lack of confidence. First, unlike other natural resource sectors, the fishery sector is beholden to the federal government for access to the resource. Experience has shown that licenses and quotas can be involuntarily relinquished without compensation. This has had a rippling effect throughout the sector, leading to a lack of confidence to invest. Operators will not invest if they don't think they can have their license or quota long enough to earn a return on investment. Second is a second push to meet Canada's marine conservation target by establishing marine protected areas or other refuges, discussion of new minimum standards on marine protected areas, and speculation of more ambitious marine conservation targets to come. The fishing sector is getting squeezed into fewer areas where it can harvest. And third, amendments to the Fisheries Act and some 15 new regulatory amendments to follow represent a time of tremendous change in the regulatory framework governing the sector. But none of these changes really address the priorities of the sector. We operate under some antiquated regulations that have not been updated for over 30 years, acting as a barrier to efficiency, innovation, and improved conservation. So why does this matter? Well, I can give you 3 reasons, and all relating to growth opportunities. 1, growing global population and growing affluence are leading to growing demand for protein, including fish and seafood. Here at home, the federal government has set an ambitious growth target for reaching $75 billion of agri-food exports by 2025. and the sector is missing out on $600 million of additional revenue annually because we are not maximizing the value of what we harvest today. We would like to realize our growth potential, but that won't happen without investment. I would now like to dive a little deeper on the first issue of involuntary relinquishment. This relates to the government's reconciliation agenda. This only happens in our sector because the government exercises its authority of claiming licenses and quotas are a privilege to a public resource, not a right. This does not happen in other sectors such as oil and gas, mining, or forestry. But just because it can doesn't mean it should. Fisheries and Oceans has testified in court that involuntary relinquishment by commercial license holders is unnecessary and unhelpful to the principles of reconciliation. Moreover, the BC Supreme Court has iterated that voluntary relinquishment should be the route to reconciliation. Our recommendation has been urging DFO to resume its use of a willing buyer, willing seller model for reallocations as part of the reconciliation agenda. It has previously done so with the Pacific Integrated Commercial Fishery Program, and this will respect past investments and facilitate ongoing investment. Re-establishing the confidence to invest will enable growth aspired by the sector and envisioned by the government. At the same time, it will enable innovation, making the sector more competitive and sustainable. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Coming back to Ms. McEwen, Canadian Union of Public Employees. Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Cross Canada. I thank you for the opportunity to be here. I will summarize our main recommendations from the written report that CUPE has submitted to the committee, and I'll propose a bit of a twist on what the federal government can and should do to foster a competitive economic environment. While it's not often appreciated this way, investment in public services plays a very important role in improving any nation's productivity and competitiveness. For example, it's been estimated that each dollar in public infrastructure investment generates an average of 17 cents per year in cost savings to Canadian businesses. Improvements in public health have increased productivity by at least 20% across OECD countries. A post-secondary degree increases individual earnings and presumably their productivity by about 40%, and increased educational attainment is responsible for about 20% of overall growth in productivity in Canada. Public investment in childcare provides a social return of $2 for every dollar invested, and it significantly increases employment and economic output, and it pays for itself through increases to government tax revenue. Improved universal public pensions, which this government introduced at the beginning of its mandate, actually increases economic growth and generates more jobs because it generates more demand for lower income families. It improves productivity by reducing barriers to labor mobility during your working life. And for years, we've been told that we need to lower corporate taxes, cut back public spending, deregulate, privatize, and sign more international trade and investment treaties in order to create a competitive business environment, and then that will lead to prosperity for all of us. But what we've seen as a result of this policy prescription is actually a growing concentration of wealth at the top, dwindling productivity growth across industrialized nations, and mostly stagnant wages. In Canada, if you take out Alberta from wage growth, everyone else's wages have stagnated. So even organizations that have commonly advocated for the previous measures of lowering corporate taxes and deregulation are now starting to rethink their approach. And so we think it's time for a new paradigm for productivity and competitiveness, one that focuses on people. For example, the research shows us that improvements in healthcare are responsible for about 25% of the increase in labor productivity in industrialized countries in recent decades. It makes sense that workers are more productive when they have their basic needs taken care of, when they have high-quality post-secondary education that they can afford, when they don't have to worry about bridging the gap in their family's various care needs. This is why CUPE recommends several measures to restore the social wage in Canada, which will boost productivity, competitiveness, and well-being for all Canadians. The first is to establish a national, universal, single-payer pharmacare plan. And we recommend that it be developed with the provinces and territories to make sure that all Canadians have access to safe and effective prescription drugs, with a national formulary and an arm's-length federal agency to manage the plan. We recommend that the federal government commit to sufficient long-term funding to establish a national early learning and childcare framework, working with the provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples that will ensure universal, affordable, inclusive, and high-quality childcare for all Canadian families. And we recommend that this, in this immediate budget, that we invest at least $1 billion towards that aim. This is a little bit of a higher goal. We recommend that you create a dedicated post-secondary transfer to the provinces, increasing transfer funding by 40%, and work with the provinces to reduce and eventually eliminate tuition fees for post-secondary education. We recommend a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour. Again, that increases demand for low-income families, it supports local communities, and increases economic output. And we recommend a modernized fair wage policy that applies to all federal contractors. The federal government should set the standard in establishing fair wages and good work. We recommend converting the Canada Infrastructure Bank to a truly public infrastructure bank that uses only the lower cost public funding, and convert federal funding for more costly P3s into funding for publicly financed and operated infrastructure. We recommend that you level the playing field for national businesses and tax foreign e-commerce companies like Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, and Google on the business that they do in Canada. It's only fair, and it would generate about $1 billion in tax revenue. And finally, I would submit to the committee that Trump's tax cuts are a short-term sugar rush for the U.S. economy and are likely to be either undone or result in significant cuts to public services in the U.S. Either way, there is no rush to follow the United States down a path that has seen large U.S. corporations continue a trend of short-term stock price boosting by share buybacks, for example, and has not seen any significant investment in physical infrastructure or in workers. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. Turning then to the Public Service Alliance of Canada, Mr. West, welcome.
Thank you for your invitation to appear today. Our President, Chris Aylward, sends his regrets. PSAC has several recommendations for the 2019 federal budget that were outlined in our written submission. The Phoenix pay system is still a matter of great concern to our members and everyone who works in the federal public service. We are in ongoing discussions with the government about damages, among other issues. However, the 2018 federal budget failed to provide a plan to allocate its funding commitments related to Phoenix into the future. What is more, the funding was insufficient to ensure that federal workers are paid correctly and to compensate them for the damages Phoenix has caused. The 2019 budget must include sufficient funding for proper compensation. It must include funding for the development and thorough testing of any new system, and funding for the human resources needed to support the current Phoenix system and any new system going forward. Another big concern is the use of private-public partnerships, or P3s, for federal services and infrastructure. Evidence shows that P3s result in cost savings or do not result in cost savings or reduce risk because the public has to pick up the pieces of when the private partner fails. The Phoenix disaster tells that story very well. Around the world, governments are moving away from the P3 model because cost-benefit analysis support fully public infrastructure investments. The government certainly does not need P3s given the lower borrowing costs afforded to it. We recommend that the government cancel current procurement processes for P3 infrastructure and reissue them as design-build requests, with public sector workers providing the operation and maintenance of those facilities. We also recommend that the government develop a process to terminate contracts for other existing P3s and return them wholly to the public service to operate and maintain. Now I want to touch on precarious or non-standard work, a type of work that is increasingly common in Canada. In the federal public service, 15.3% of employees are categorized as term, casual, or student. This number does not include workers who are self-employed or employed by companies that contract to the federal government, such as temporary help agencies. While information about the actual contracts and payments to these contractors is available, nowhere is the government reporting, is there a consistent and comprehensive tracking of the people who make up this substantial portion of the workforce. This is a reflection of poor oversight. We recommend the government reduce, with the goal of eliminating the use of temporary help agency workers and other types of external contract personnel within the federal public service. Further, we recommend developing and implementing, in consultation with public sector unions, a system-wide process for the comprehensive tracking and reporting on the use of temporary health agencies and other external contract personnel. Now, a word about pay equity and the legislation we expect the government to table this fall. If this new law is to be effective, there needs to be funding attached to it. Both the 2004 Federal Pay Equity Task Force and the more recent Special House of Commons Committee on Pay Equity called for a Federal Pay Equity Commission and a Pay Equity Tribunal, both of which will require funding. Informing and educating employers, unions, and employees of their rights and responsibilities, as well as enforcing the new law, will require funding. We expect to see this funding included in the 2019 budget. Finally, a recommendation about childcare. The 2018 federal budget acknowledged that women's participation in the paid labor force has been one of the most powerful sources of economic growth in recent decades. In order to provide the type of child care system that actually advances gender equality and yields economic returns, the government must go forward and beyond its multi-year allocation plan. PSAC supports increasing federal child care funding by $1 billion annually until we meet the accepted international benchmark of 1% of GDP annually on early learning and child care. We also support providing conditional federal transfers to the provinces and ensuring the federal funding goes directly to public and non-for-profit providers. Thank you, and we'll be pleased to address any of your questions.
Thank you all. Then going to 7-minute rounds initially. Ms. Rudd.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming and presenting to us on this lovely rainy day. A couple of things. Sergio and Tim, listening to your remarks, and as you know, I know a fair bit about the organizations and the work you're doing jointly with the government, particularly with NRCan. The larger energy strategy or national energy strategy that we talk a lot about, I'm going to ask you both to comment on that and how you see what you're talking about today fitting into that larger Canadian energy strategy. But as you know, through the Generation Energy Report, there really was an all-of-the-above approach as we look at doing a number of things that we're doing right now, which is Ontario as an example. Nuclear is very prevalent in my riding. In Ontario, 60% of our electricity comes from nuclear. The rest comes from gas, wind, and solar. So the decarbonization, if you will, of the grid in Ontario has moved forward significantly. How we help the rest of the country and work with the rest of the country, the provinces and territories, to help move that forward as we increase the number of electric vehicles, as we go further into the work that I know you've all been doing. So I'll go to you first, Sergio. Your national electrification strategy. Can you tell me a little bit about how you see that fitting into the larger Canadian energy strategy and what that would look like?
Thank you very much. First of all, we've taken the position for a long while that we would hope that both the provincial and federal governments would push that national Canadian energy strategy over the goal line. I think it is logical to have governments working together to harness all of our assets in all of our regions and have that blueprint going forward. Secondly, I think that strategy would imply a greater degree of coordination. So, for example, when it comes to regulatory frameworks, as I said in my remarks, we find it dangerously heavy right now, and it does affect competitiveness, particularly when you have a government in the United States that is shaving regulatory overhang at a record rate. I'm not suggesting that we need to follow suit on every aspect. I'm not suggesting we slash and burn our regulations. We recognize the need for regulatory frameworks for our industry, and that regulations serve societal goals as initiated by governments. However, the fact of the matter is that we are really experiencing a cumulative regulatory pancaking that no one government, no level of government is responsible for or accountable. And we've asked for the annual ministers' meeting of mines and energy ministers that would be a perfect and legitimate forum for addressing that, because as Tim mentioned, every level of government is only concerned with its own respective layer of pancake regulations. But we need to get the whole cumulative aspect right, because our industry is asked to eat and pay for each of these pancakes, and then we pass it on to the consumer. So a strategy would also inherently make cooperation a priority, and therefore coherence. On electrification, I would start, as we suggested to the minister and in this presentation, is to begin the process of having an electrification strategy. We all talk about the need, and the conference board has some big numbers of what we would need for the electricity sector, but we need to have a national strategy, if you will, which again puts the onus on the federal government to also include provincial and territorial governments. And we suggest that we fund that development so we can, again, all play a part, including the confidence of Canadians and industry. But we've got to start with a plan, and until we have a plan, the talk is going to be disjointed and therefore ineffective.
Thank you very much. Tim, I'll move to you. Your recommendation number 2, connect rural Canadians to natural gas. As you know, I live in a rural riding, Northumberland, Peterborough South, and we have been seeing natural gas come out further and further into the more rural communities. And certainly to my agriculture community, it's an extremely important asset as whether it's poultry farmers that were relying on electricity or diesel to make sure their barns were warm, and if something went wrong, there was no plan B. So, can you talk a little bit, there's 2 things maybe. One, the natural gas as it relates to the rural communities and how you see that unfolding, and again, what that strategy may look like. And the second, you mentioned the natural gas and vehicles. I have to confess I wanted an electric vehicle, but my rural riding does not support the infrastructure as of yet to the degree where I feel comfortable in January running around my riding. But I did manage to buy a hybrid last week, so I'm moving there. One of the things that's interesting to me is countries like Argentina use natural gas almost exclusively in their vehicles, and they've done so because they have an abundance of it. So can you talk about how you see that working with the electric vehicle strategy, and also how you see how we can accelerate that rural access to natural gas?
Sure. Thank you for the questions. First, on rural expansion, the interest is coming from many members like you. Many of your colleagues on the government-backed benches have come to us with a specific request in response to demands from your own constituents, and so it's responding to a reality on the ground. People are saying, "Wait a second, there's cheaper energy over there. Why can't I get access to it?" So, the point of the strategy is to be able to respond to that. There are many precedents for the expansion of energy infrastructure into rural areas by government on the electric side and on the gas side. We're talking about a similar expansion. So this would be direct assistance to underwrite part of the cost of the infrastructure. Other portions of the cost would be picked up by the utilities and ultimately by the ratepayers themselves. So it's an assistance program, and again, there are many precedents for it. So we would simply be building on past precedents, both federal and provincial. I think that the response of the government should be to open the doors to those areas that are looking for this kind of assistance, and they will come forward. We have a long list of communities right now that have approached our member companies, and we've encouraged those communities to talk to provincial governments and to the federal government, and we're happy to do that directly. There are lots of precedents we can cite to show you how this can be done. On the vehicle question, it kind of goes back to a discussion I had with the previous Minister of Natural Resources, Minister Carr, and in respect to broader energy issues, and it touches on some of the points Sergio was making about the idea of an energy strategy. We're a little concerned about some of the conversation because it seems to be turning towards proposing technology favorites. And as I said to Minister Carr, is your goal to reduce emissions, or is your goal to design what the energy system should look like? We think that of the two, it should be reduce emissions and then say to industry, all right, go and be creative. And with respect to vehicles, we think that there are opportunities for electric vehicles, more likely in highly dense urban areas where it's relatively cost-effective to build the infrastructure. For natural gas vehicles, there would be other portions of the transportation market better suited: freight vehicles, rail, marine, etc. And much of this is happening now. We think it can be expanded. We think that we can look at the idea of a national transportation grid, energy grid, whereby we can be extending the use of natural gas. Essentially, that's what happened in countries like Argentina, where there was extensive support for the expansion of that infrastructure, and it happened to be the fuel that was most available to them for a variety of reasons.
Thank you all. Mr. Polyev, 7 minutes.
Yes, my first question is for Mr. West. Wondering if your organization has a position on the infrastructure bank.
We certainly do. It wasn't directly in our submission, but certainly we agree with our colleagues in CUPE that the infrastructure bank ought to be funded with public money for the same reasons that my colleague Angela just enunciated. We believe that public financing is cheaper than private financing. We believe that the outward costs to the taxpayer are more transparent than the costs are with private financing. And we believe that the ability to be transparent and accountable about the infrastructure being built is far more available than it would be with private financing.
Do you worry about the government's plan to provide loan guarantees and other financial instruments that will protect the profits of private corporations at taxpayer expense?
Certainly, I think our concern would include that, but it's further than that. We believe that the public has borrowing power that's cheaper than the private sector. We believe that it's not a question of a supply, rather it's a question of the financial resources that we ask the public to pay. There's been a general consensus over the last few years that economists around the world have been starting to dispute that austerity and filling the gap through private funding has been successful. That is showing more and more not to be the case.
My next question is for
Pierre, go ahead, Angela.
I just wanted to say that actually loan guarantees are actually one of the things that government can do really well. It often doesn't cost them money, and It's useful to sustain industries, for example, right now where we have the steel tariffs or the softwood lumber tariffs. So in particular emergencies, loan guarantees can be a very useful tool for government to help industry weather difficult storms. In other examples, through the infrastructure bank, it's not a great plan.
Right. My concern is that municipalities have successfully put the burden of risk on private companies when it comes to infrastructure procurement, so that if a project goes over budget, the private company has to pay that overrun, which I think is fair. They're the ones that are responsible for the mistake. I worry about loan guarantees that actually protect the private company against its own failures at the expense of taxpayers. I don't have a problem with infrastructure companies making a profit, but profit and risk go together. So if they make a mistake, it shouldn't be my constituents who pay for their mistake. That's my principal objection to its use in infrastructure.
I would agree with that.
The Honourable Sergio Markey was talking about the pancakes of regulation. Which regulations specifically could the federal government remove or have removed for to allow for additional electrification?
Again, as opposed to picking a regulation to remove, first of all, on the climate change, there's many tools being used. The question is whether we need all of them when we're putting a price on carbon. So perhaps there's too many tools, but when we talk about the regulatory pancaking, the most detrimental is the uncoordinated way that all the different levels of government put regulatory and legislative initiatives. So there is a redundancy and there is a duplication and there is a weight that is becoming, as I said, dangerously heavy. So rather than putting the onus on which one regulation in the federal toolbox versus provincial, what we need to do is to see what we are doing cumulative and whether we can decrease the weight of that in an intelligent, coherent way rather than picking and choosing.
Can we?
I'm sorry?
Can we reduce it?
I think we can. I think we should. I think if governments were to actually look at all those layers of pancakes.
But you have looked at all those layers of pancakes. Can you tell us? We're looking more for answers rather than more questions. What exactly would you deregulate? Which regulations would you remove? What steps exactly are you asking us to take?
We haven't done that piece of homework yet. I think we got to get to first base first, because governments refuse to even talk about coordinating.
Okay. Question then is for the Fisheries Council. You mentioned some of the regulations that are accumulating on your sector. Which would you eliminate?
I think first we have to recognize that DFO, with the new Fisheries Act, is going to have a tremendous burden on itself to write a lot of the new regulations under the new Act. It will require resources within the department to hold the consultations that are required for that. It will require the support of the Centre of Government in justice lawyers to draft the regulations. We'd like to see some specific regulations addressed while they're working on that. To give some specific examples, export certificates. So our companies have to request an export certificate. It takes 5 days to get the certificate. CFIA does not inspect in order to provide the export certificate. So it's just a delay. And our facilities are already approved through CFIA, through a HACCP program and other measures. So that's just slowing things down. And for an export-oriented economy, that should be something that should be easily fixed. LED lighting on fishing gear. Other countries use this new technology to either repel unwanted species to avoid bycatch or to attract the target species. We're not allowed to do that. some marking of gear or even retrieval of lost gear is not allowed under certain circumstances, and that seems a little perverse situation. So there's little things like that that are preventing us from innovating, becoming more competitive, and those are just some simple ones.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. And Pierre, Mr. Julian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I tried to get 3 sets of questions in. Thanks for your statements. I'm going to start with you, Mr. West. The Phoenix debacle has hit hard. I've had many public servants come to me that either haven't been paid or are being forced to pay money that they never received. We've heard of public servants who have lost their homes. How important is it for this government to fix what has been an incredible debacle and disrespect being shown our public servants? And is it important to have a public inquiry so that we can get to the bottom of why this decision was made in the first place?
Well, it's exceptionally important to have it fixed. And one of the things that we've asked for in our submission was more financing. In the last federal budget, the government only allotted $35 million, $12 million, $8 million, and $8 million in the next 4 fiscal years. The Treasury Board report on the first Auditor General's report and the Senate Committee's report both suggest that it's going to take up to 5 years to fix Phoenix.
Sorry, it's going to take how much?
Up to 5 years to fix Phoenix.
Yeah.
And so more funding will be required. Additionally, if there's going to be looking at a new system that goes peripheral to Phoenix, and the new system can't be in place until Phoenix is fixed, the government's going to have to hire more staff to work on that new system, to advise, to let them know if it's working or not, to do the testing. In terms of a public inquiry, what we're asking for in a public inquiry is why did no senior bureaucrat say no? It's not so much who caused Phoenix within the bureaucracy, who were the players. We know who those players are. But at no time, and we were talking with the government from 2011, and we're still talking to the government, at no time did any of those senior bureaucrats say no. We asked, in our first meetings in 2011, we asked for the business case for this new system that they were putting in place, and we were refused it. I received the business case about a year ago, and had we received that business case at that time and were able to talk about it publicly, it would have been very, very clear that the kind of robust analysis that was necessary to have a pay system that actually paid people was not being considered.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Ms. McEwen. Thank you very much for your statement, Ms. McEwen. I think this should be very much part of our report as a Finance Committee. You're talking about a new paradigm in terms of productivity, and some of the figures that have been cited here are that our universal public health care system is a $3,000 competitive advantage per employee per year for Canadian businesses vis-a-vis their American competitors. You've talked about a whole range of other investments that would make a difference for Canadian businesses and to make a difference for productivity in Canada. Can you comment on the importance of the not following the Trump economics, where we simply cut with no obligation, no direction, no strategy, taxes for the corporate sector, rather than making these kinds of investments that actually improve the competitiveness of Canadian businesses, but also help the quality of life of Canadians?
Absolutely, and I think if you talk to business leaders, they'll often say that their biggest advantage is their workers, right? And you saw Amazon investing in Vancouver because of the access to high-quality graduates from university there. And what we see is that when you have this Trump strategy of just kind of cutting regulations willy-nilly, cutting taxes, putting our entire kind of global trade system into jeopardy with trade wars with China and tariffs of 25% on steel, that creates uncertainty. That doesn't create a certain stable, sustainable environment, right? So business often wants predictability. They want to know. This is what we've heard from the panel today. They also want a government that's willing to work with them when stuff doesn't make sense, right? Like why can't I mark where I lost my fishing gear? So we're not saying don't involve or engage with business in that, but we are saying that when you deregulate the way that Trump does and when you cut taxes the way that Trump does, you often create more problems than you're solving. And you're not getting down to that core thing that we need, which is investment in public services, investment in people. That creates well-being, because the reason that we want growth in the first place is for us to all have a higher standard of living and better quality of life.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Marquet, you don't seem to age at all, which is a bit disconcerting to the rest of us. Can you comment on two things? First, the zero-emission vehicle strategy. I have a electric vehicle manufacturer in my district, Electromechanica, that has not been able to get 1 cent of government support to build a new manufacturing facility. So the importance of that strategy. And also, you didn't mention in your presentation smart grid technology, which certainly works in Northern Europe to deliver electrical power through more different types of feedstock. Is that an important part of what this committee should be considering?
Thank you very much. I wish your statement on aging were true. You're a diplomat. First of all, on the zero vehicle emission strategy, we're awaiting the task force report. We participated in the deliberations, and so we're hoping that that is going to give us a good, practical, realistic plan with realistic targets. We know that a lot of European car competitors are already making very ambitious plans for zero-emission vehicles, and I think we've got to keep up with the Joneses. So we look forward to that task force report coming out any day now, as we understand it. In terms of smart grids, that's very much part of our considerations going forward. In fact, under our first recommendations in terms of oversubscribed NRCan funding program, one of them was the $100 million smart grid program. And so we think that that was a success because the monies were available, the private sector made use of it, and I think it has worked well as one of the 4 programs that we think that should be recapitalized. Because one thing is certain, that the future of the electricity sector will certainly not look like the one today. And obviously smart grids and renewable energy and how we integrate renewable energy with our current utilities is obviously going to be something that's going to be very significant in continuing to bring down emissions and to, at the same time, continue to produce the reliable power that Canadians have come to expect.
Thank you all. On that last question, Sergio, where's the best smart grid in the world? Germany?
I think Germany is certainly one of them, but there is also some very interesting work being done by New Brunswick Power in partnership with Siemens on smart grid technology. So it's not like Canada is just looking elsewhere. We're also beginning to renew and innovate the way we must.
Thank you. Mr. Sabara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everybody. Good morning. First of all, going to the Honourable former Minister, Mr. Markey, your comments on competitiveness and what I would call both regulatory layering and regulatory uncertainty, which tends to both slow down decision-making, defer decision-making by companies, by private investors, is something that I've often thought about and been very cognizant about. With regards to your submission on page 5, when you talk about an appropriate response to what the United States did earlier this year. And when you look holistically, if you were a company 2 years ago, you had no incentive to repatriate your capital back to the United States. Now you have a very big incentive to repatriate capital and retained earnings back to the United States. And with that, once you do, you can invest it and get a full write-off in year one, and so forth. So we need to think about that. In my mind, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, out of the measures that you've put down here to promote Canada's economic competitiveness, where would you rank accelerated capital cost allowance changes to that measure versus the other ones that you've listed?
I think, first of all, I'm glad you're thinking about the whole issue of competitiveness and the relationship with the regulatory regime. And as I said in my earlier statement, we're very pleased, the CA, that the Minister of Finance has chosen competitiveness and growing the economy as a theme. I think it's time, because I think business has been fairly united for the last couple of years in beating that drum, and so we're looking forward to what kind of tools in that financial toolbox that the government will be using. I think that the capital cost allowance is probably as close to the top in terms of what our members have certainly urged us in terms of advocacy with government. So that would be a very, very high priority for us. It was also in previous years and continues to be the case.
Of course, thank you. I would note I think that Sergio and Tim need to have a conversation, because in Tim, in your submission on Section 2, when I read it last night, and it says that at the same time there's a growing realization that large-scale electrification of end-use demand is neither cost-effective nor technically feasible. So I think you guys need to square on that one. But I do want to speak to the Canadian Gas Association this morning. We know that from the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin and from other resource fields that we have in Canada, that we have a natural advantage in gas. And out of your recommendations here, where can we get our most bang for our buck in terms of incentivizing further natural gas exploration and the appropriate distribution model for both rural and urban?
Well, look, we have, as you noted, a supply picture that's incredibly positive. It just gets more and more positive all the time. The Government of Canada itself talks about several hundred years of supply. The product's as affordable as it has, I think, ever been. I was in Nova Scotia last week, and I had a bill in my hand from 1915, and natural gas is almost one-fourth the commodity cost it was in 1915. So you're right, the supply picture is extraordinary. The best single thing we can do to continue to help on the supply side is to look at the regulatory framework, to look at the regulatory pancaking, and I can list a series of provisions which are very onerous for our industry. The clean fuel standard, the methane regulation, the carbon backstop, the energy efficiency standards, the proposal for offset purchases, Bill C-69. Each of these represents a cost to the end user. So and to the producer. So we need to look at how we can lighten that cost. And on the distribution side, we need to send a signal which isn't as negative as the signal has been about the prospects of using natural gas. We're all for electricity. Many of our members are joint. We have a great deal of cooperation. At the same time, we compete. And it's healthy competition. Obviously, the electricity industry is going to advance an electrification strategy. The chairman asked about a smart grid. I'd say we don't need a single smart grid. We need a smart energy delivery system, and that can be an electric grid. That can be a natural gas distribution system. That can be one of a variety of choices, and we shouldn't be picking a favorite. We should be giving choice.
One last question, and actually over to QP and the public service workers. Our government right now is consulting on revising the Canada Labour Code. We've also, as a government, removed two pieces, what I would characterize anti-union pieces of legislation from our former counterparts, Bill C-525 and 377. We did that earlier in the mandate. And how important that is that to your members that whether it's private sector or public sector union workers, and those are hardworking middle-class Canadians, that they have a level playing field and able to go to work with the protections and benefits that they deserve.
Absolutely. I mean, 377 and 525 were awful pieces of legislation that targeted unions, and we're very glad that most of that has been undone, particularly in terms of privacy for our members with 377. And I think that the Canada Labour Code review is a good opportunity. There's a lot that can be done in terms of recognizing the reality of precarious work that CUPE members in particular are struck by, like contract flipping, like a $15 minimum wage at the federal level, making it easier to unionize precarious workers so that they can have the support of a union when they need it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all. Mr. Richards, 5-minute rounds.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Mr. Landsbergen from the Fisheries Council. Partly because you had sort of mentioned your 4 priority areas in your opening and you didn't have a chance to cover them all, at least in detail anyway. And but I actually wanted to start with one of the areas that you were able to cover in a bit more detail in your opening, just as a bit of a follow-up with it. You talked about, and you didn't use this term, but I will, confiscation of essentially licenses. And I say that word because it, to me, does sound a lot like when land is confiscated, things like that. It sounds like a very similar type of a situation. I wonder if you can just elaborate a bit more on that for me, and maybe do you have some specific stories of where people have had their licenses taken, and can you elaborate a bit more as well on the chilling effect, I guess, that has in terms of investment based on those instances?
Sure. The primary instance, I think, which everyone around the table knows, is surf clam quota that was taken away earlier this year, and that decision has been reversed. A new process is slated to start next year. We haven't seen any signal that this new process will address our primary concern, which is that it was taken away without any compensation, that they're going to follow a willing buyer, willing seller model for reallocations such as that. The chilling effect, obviously that had an impact on that particular company because they had made investments to upgrade capacity, and now some of that capacity is surplus. And so they have some tough decisions on how they handle that. For everyone else, it's, well, who's next? The reconciliation agenda, we're not disputing it, we're not opposing it, it's how you undertake it. And so everyone else in the sector is worried about, well, who's next? Is my license the next one that could get taken away? And should I be making that next investment on upgrading our processing equipment or a new boat, or providing assistance to inshore harvesters as they're looking to upgrade their equipment or their vessels? Because sometimes people in the industry, it's all the supply chain is all integrated, so we try and help each other. And a lot of that, any discretionary investment is being revisited and postponed, and perhaps in some cases mothballed. So until this gets addressed.
Yeah. So yeah, what you're essentially saying is that the uncertainty that's being created is causing investment to be delayed or potentially foregone altogether. Sounds very similar to what I'm hearing in my part of the country with oil and gas and some of the changing regulation there, and the uncertainty that's created, of course, makes it hard to make a choice to make an investment. Sounds very similar type of a situation. I wanted to just kind of something that's kind of related to that. I would assume that you would represent some small businesses, some kind of family-run businesses as part of the Fisheries Council. So you'd be well aware of some of the small business tax changes that were proposed last year, and obviously based on a lot of lot of public pressure. The government did somewhat walk back from those changes. But one of the things that kind of remains a concern, I think, or at least that I'm hearing remains a concern, and I wanted to hear your take on it, whether it's a concern for those small businesses that you represent, is the ability for intergenerational transfers, and the fact that that is something that it's difficult to do, and it's sort of we have a system that's almost set up that I guess incentivizes people to sell off to others outside of their family rather than to transfer within the family. Is that something you've seen in your sector? Is that something you have a concern about?
Well, it's a good question, and we do have issues with that, particularly in the inshore fleet in Atlantic Canada. And so, FCC, we represent processors, and our members have offshore harvesting in Atlantic Canada. Because of the rules, we're not allowed to have any inshore licenses. So I'm not the expert or the authority on that, but there are rules that dictate how an inshore fisherman can transfer license, whether it be to the next generation or someone else. So our issues are around the licensing, not a tax treatment or anything like that.
Okay.
Blake.
Okay. Time goes fast. Thank you.
It does. You're having fun. Mr. Fragascatis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Egan, you said something there a few moments ago. You talked about costs to end users and costs to producers. But I want to ask you a question with that in mind as it pertains to cybersecurity. I noted in your brief you had a section there, and you've mentioned it here today. But when I think about the risks posed by a cybersecurity attack for critical infrastructure, that impacts all of us. That impacts our economy, certainly our competitiveness. And I wonder if you could speak to that in general terms, and what you'd like to offer in terms of the next budget, or I know we are pursuing as a government initiatives around this, and you have mentioned that, but quite frankly, I think this is a great challenge. This is in many ways the challenge of the future for our economy, for our society, from a security perspective as well. So I'll put that first to Mr. Egan, and I also would like Mr. Markey to comment on that from a critical infrastructure perspective in the electricity sector.
Sure, I'm happy to comment on that. Cybersecurity is a significant priority for us, and in fact, it's an area where we cooperate extraordinarily closely, electricity and gas distribution systems, alongside other critical infrastructure in the energy sector and beyond, with the transportation sector, with water supply, with a host of other sectors. I share your concern about the risks that cybersecurity presents. I think it's a growing concern. I would applaud the government on its cybersecurity work to date. We have worked very closely with several federal departments on this, and we continue to do so. As we did with the previous government, it's an area where there is pretty extraordinary agreement across the political spectrum on the risks we face as a country. And again, I'm very supportive of the government's current direction. In fact, my board is in Ottawa this week, meeting with officials to talk about other opportunities we have to cooperate, and we're endeavoring to ensure that such cooperation is not just within Canada between industries, but is in fact with our allies abroad as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I would certainly echo the remarks that Tim just made. We are spending more and more monies on finding the experts and the technologies that can stay one step ahead of what has become an unfortunate growth industry in terms of cyber attacks and hacking. And electricity within the energy community is the #1 target for these hackers. So each of our utilities has come under a considerable amount of siege, and certainly you can multiply that by tenfold in terms of our American counterparts. So firstly, we certainly as well work very closely with not only the Department of Public Security, but our security agencies. We have found that the communication security establishment, where most of our utilities have signed relationship agreements with, is providing top-notch information and usually quicker than what we are getting on a shared basis from the American establishment. And one of the reasons for that is there's so many American security agencies that trying to coordinate and then funnel the information is very time-consuming. So I applaud the communications security establishment, among other agencies. I think a second aspect has to be to get our regulators knowledgeable on the cyber security, and the challenge there is that their reports at the end of the day are public, and yet the information that you get from our cybersecurity agencies are confidential. So how do we square that circle? And lastly, we are all interrelated, and so we have to have a North American disposition when it comes to cybersecurity frameworks, because we are as strong as the weakest link in that continental chain. There's a huge amount of work between United States and Canada, government to government, private sector to private sector, and we participate in an electricity subsector coordinating council that brings all of our two security agencies personnel together with the private sector, and we're meeting on October 11th in Washington. The question there is Mexico, and without speaking ill of any of our partners, we, I think, have to integrate Mexico much, much quicker and deeper into the NERC establishment, which is the North American Electricity Corporation that actually puts out, Reliability Corporation, that puts out these cybersecurity standards. So I would certainly make an effort on the North American side, and I think our ministers of energy continentally, when they meet, should have a standing item on cybersecurity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Mr. Van Kesteren.
Tim, you've been here a long time, as long as I've been here, and I can remember you advocating for the gas industry back when there was concerns about our fuel and our oil. They talked about peak oil at the time, and of course, with the advent of fracking, we've seen an incredible surge of that energy supply. Gas, as you know, in my riding is extremely important. Chatham, Kent, Leamington, Union Gas. We have the greenhouse industry. Back when I was first elected, I think they were paying $11 a gigajoule. And I don't know what it's at right now, about 4 maybe.
Didn't check this morning, but yeah, under 4, I believe.
Under 4. Incredible news story. Now, there were some advancements made, and we were strong advocates for the gas. Our government was for the gas. We wanted to see that happen in the private sector. And I remember the trucks coming up from Robert's truck in Robert company in Montreal. How is that initiative going? There was some talk about fuel stations lining up along the 401. Where are we with that? How's the trucking industry moving forward with natural gas?
The industry is quite supportive, and that support is growing. The challenge, as you know, given your own experience in the industry, margins are incredibly small, and so the decision to switch fuels is represents a significant economic cost to an independent trucker, and so the trucker wants to know that the infrastructure is going to be there if they do so. I think that governments can be sending signals that they're supportive of the expansion of this infrastructure, and that's the best way to move this along further. But I can tell you that we've had significant gains in the marine sector, with ferries on the West Coast, with ferries in Quebec, that we have an increasing amount of interest from the rail sector about moving rail to gas. And we have to think about transportation, freight transportation more broadly, not just any one subsector. And if we do that, I think that we'll see significantly more movement.
Now, we talk about the opportunities. I remember at the time there was such a demand for liquefied natural gas. The Japanese, after the earthquake, of course, were hungry for our product. What's the situation on the West Coast as far as the natural gas being able to be exported? Are we stalled? What's happening?
So, as you know, my membership is on the distribution side, not on the production side, and our file is not LNG exports per se. That said, a couple of our member companies are tracking that very closely because they have LNG facilities of their own, and I would point in particular to the FortisBC facility in the West Coast, which has looked at some small export opportunities and investment in others. The challenge, as always, on LNG exports is waiting for the investors to make a final investment decision. And you can go to the press reports as readily as I can. Why are those investors not making those decisions yet? They have reservations about regulatory burdens and the competitiveness of the Canadian marketplace.
And you and I have had some private conversations in regards, and we moved those forward to the government as well. You made a submission in finance a number of years ago for the distribution of gas to the northern communities. Is that initiative being entertained by the government at this point? Is there some movement in that direction?
Well, our proposal in our pre-budget submission for the expansion of the gas system to rural and remote communities, I focused on the rural in my earlier remarks, but it applies to remote communities, and I would note that we're having conversations with players in the 3 territories, the Northwest Territory and the other 2 territories as well as what I'll call the near north. The opportunity is significant. We need to think about it as a national picture. We need to think about the infrastructure that's required to build it.
Thank you. Have I got a few minutes? Just 1 minute. Mr. Lyonsberg, do you represent the freshwater fisheries as well too? You're aware that my riding has the largest freshwater fishing port in the world. I'm going to brag about that for a second, but there is some initiative being taken right now for the basin of the western Lake Erie to be turned into a park. Is that what you were referring to as far as losing fishing opportunities for commercial fishers?
I was referring more to coastal ocean marine protected areas, but I know that it is happening in inland waters as well. That would be more under the purview of Parks Canada rather than DFO, but same issues apply.
Thank you, David, and all. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. David asked a couple of questions that I was going to ask. The first one is regarding, I represent the Northwest Territories, so I'm quite concerned about the issue of natural gas, and some of our communities are running dry in Nuvik and Norman Wells. They've been bringing in fuel from BC, which is quite expensive. Our government has provided some money to do a feasibility study in the Nuvik area, and the Inuvialuit people there want to look at developing their own reserves, looking at compressed natural gas. So my first question is, should these studies prove successful, how would your recommendations assist in making their potential project a reality?
Well, a fund for rural and remote expansion would assist with the core infrastructure costs for communities like those in your riding. Straight up, that's the way we could assist. And I would note you mentioned the system in Nunavut. As you know, it's Canada's most northern distribution utility. When local supply was drying up, the arrangement that was made was for the trucking of liquid natural gas from the Lower Mainland in British Columbia, and that in fact was a more cost-effective alternative than any of the other fuel options, which speaks to the value proposition. But to your point, in order to give you more long-term fuel security, I think there needs to be federal support for infrastructure, as there always has been in the north, but it needs to be focused on the natural gas opportunity.
It's kind of ironic that the community of Inuvik and most of the Mackenzie Valley is there's tons of natural gas wells all over the place, yet we're trucking in natural gas from BC at a very high cost. So I'm hoping there's going to be a solution there. Solar is something they're looking at, wind, but there's half the year we're in the darkness. So my next question is Fisheries Council, and I wanted to kind of touch base on the freshwater marketing board and that whole initiative and the challenges they're going through. I'm not sure where it's at, but for a while I think there was only maybe one board member left or two board members left, and I think the people from my riding, Northwest Territories, were one of the people that still participated in that whole initiative. Maybe if you could just tell me where that's at, and I'm really curious if there is anything that your organization is working on to increase the number of Indigenous fishers in the industry. I look at the Great Slave Lake where I'm from, and we have licenses that are allocated, but they're not taken up. And yet we have communities all around the lake that are Indigenous that can't take part because they don't have the harbors, they don't have the community docks, they don't have the processing facilities. And so we're bringing in people from the south to come fishing in our lakes, and then our people stay unemployed. Are you familiar with that whole scenario? Is that the case in other places, and how can we fix it? Lots to ask.
So for your first question on the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation, the government just announced within, I think, the last week, a process to look at options for how to position that corporation the best way going forward. And so there are a number of people that were appointed to an advisory panel that's looking into that, and so we'll see what the outcome of that is. But hopefully that will be a very good, fruitful exercise that will position that corporation for a much better future. In terms of Indigenous participation in the sector, it varies across the country. So in BC, about 1/3 of the sector is already Indigenous participation. In the north, in Nunavut, where we have members, it's 100% wholly owned by Indigenous communities, economic development corporations that purposely pay dividends back to the communities. And then in Atlantic Canada and elsewhere, you've got various types of business relationships between the companies and Indigenous communities, whether it be supply or otherwise. One of the big issues I think that we would all agree on is how to build the capacity for Indigenous communities to be more meaningful participants in the sector. So there's part of the programs that I mentioned, the Pacific Integrated Commercial Fisheries. There's also one in Atlantic Canada. The government has announced a new one for Northern Canada. Those programs have shifted away from buying licenses to provide funding and resource and training to the Indigenous communities to build their capacity to operate fishery operations on their own. And a lot of that needs to continue, but giving them the access in terms of licensing, and that's the harder nut to crack, I think, in the whole issue.
Thank you all. If I was to ask people or witnesses in a very short answer, what would be the key point you would make in terms of increasing Canada's competitiveness without costing the federal government to increase its deficit or spend more money? What would it be? I mean, we do have, you hear lots of talk about capital cost allowance, investment tax credits, etc. in the United States, making us less competitive, among other things. But what could we do that would make us more competitive as a nation, improve our economy, and not cost us money? I mean, if I listen to all the witnesses that we hear before this committee, we could spend millions. But what can we do without spending money to be more competitive? What would do 1 or 2 points? Tim, and then Sergio.
Mr. Chairman, reduce the regulatory burden.
Sergio?
Yeah, I was going to say, lighten the load to an earlier question. I didn't say that we advocated deletion. First of all, we're amalgamating all the regulatory initiatives impacting our industry from among 14 governments, and is proving quite the job. Secondly, Tim was right in mentioning a number of bills and instruments that we have offered amendments. So we're not saying don't do Bill C-68. What we're saying on the fisheries bill, for example, is don't impose the killing of one fish rather than an entire school of fish to be the new threshold. So regulatory lightening, is certainly one, and secondly, increasing our productivity and measure to the gap that's always been there with the United States as a way to manage and bridge that gap.
Well, I've been around a while, and I've seen the previous government of my party. I've seen the government of the guys over here on the left do regulatory reform, but why does it not get done? I hear all the time about regulations. Why can't we do something between municipal, federal, provincial to get rid of some of the regulations? Why isn't it happening? Any views? Go ahead, Angela.
Regulations often serve a purpose. And so it's not costless to get rid of regulations. First of all, it takes a great deal of time and energy to look down and say, what was the purpose of this regulation? How do we serve this purpose and continue, but allow the investment in business that we need? So, for example, methane regulations are very important because methane is much worse for the environment than carbon. And perhaps there was a reason why we couldn't recover fishing nets in the past, but maybe we haven't kept up with changing technology or how things happen. So I think there's two reasons here. And then there's obviously getting the layers of government to work together. And what stick does the federal government have to get the other levels of government to cooperate? So I would say that actually amending regulations is not costless. It takes a lot of time and energy, public sector manpower, consultations on the part of us as well to come to the table and tell you what you need to change. That takes a lot of resources from our part. So that's one reason why that hasn't happened.
I know.
Mr. Chairman, it takes political will too.
That's true, and I know we have to go to the next panel, but I'll tell you on your point, Angela, as an MP, dealing with constituent concerns, you know what my question is? Why is there no damn common sense in this system? You know, really, common sense doesn't exist in this town. You know, it really doesn't. I don't want to get into a debate. We're going to have to cut it there.
Could I add just 10 seconds on political will? When I was in public life, federal government taxes, spends, legislates, and regulates. I would suggest, with due respect, and I was guilty, that I did a lot of reflecting on the first three and very little on the last. It's not exactly the sexiest thing for elected representatives, number one. Number two, there really requires a political will among the levels of government. For example, the ministers of energy federally and provincially meet every year. This past year, they met in August up north. We have requested that they do an examination of what the left and the right hands are doing. But they haven't done that. And until you get to that stage, you can't deal with it intelligently. So there really needs to be political will, but political cooperation.
Okay, I know Paul wants in, but I am going to have to cut it there.
10 seconds.
Well, a shorter 10 seconds than Sergio.
Yeah, real 10 seconds. Right now, there's the regulatory modernization for a number of key sectors, including agri-food. I will share our submission on that, and I urge you to make that a key part of the report to make sure that there's political will to follow that through so that the centre of government gives enough resources to make it happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your submissions and answering our questions, and we'll suspend for a couple of minutes while the next panel come forward. Suspended. Ready to roll. We shall reconvene on pre-budget consultations in advance of the 2019 budget. I want to first of all thank each and everyone for coming today, and also especially thank those who presented submissions to us prior to the August 15th deadline. They're quite valuable to us to get through and think of some questions, etc. Then we'll start with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. If you're ready on that corner, Ms. Joseph, Vice President, Government Relations, and Mr. Brennan, Vice President, Oil Sands, Fiscal and Economic Policy. Welcome and thank you for coming. The floor is yours.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité.
Good morning, Mr. Chairperson and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers represents the oil and gas industries in Canada. We have more than 80 members in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. We are here today to talk about a significant opportunity for Canada. According to the International Energy Agency, which comes under the United Nations, the global demand for energy is growing around the world, people need more energy, particularly those who want to improve their quality of life. The agency provides that this increase will be the equivalent of adding another country the size of China to our planet by 2040. And this oil and gas, natural gas will respond to more than half of that demand. Canada has superior quantities of oil and natural gas, and it has shown great leadership environmentally. It has made commitments in terms of social inclusion and has one of the best regulatory regimes that is the strictest in the world. And for these reasons, amongst others, we believe that Canada can and should become a first-class provider of energy on the world stage in order to meet this increased demand. And why is this a good thing for Canada? Well, today our industry employs over 500,000 Canadians, contributes more than $109 billion to GDP, and pays approximately $12 billion per year to governments, and we could do more. In terms of inclusion, Aboriginal people represent 6% of the labor force in our industry, whereas the national average is 4%. In 2016, companies from the oil sands industry bought $3.3 billion worth of goods and services from almost 400 businesses belonging to individuals or Aboriginal communities. We have invested over $1.4 billion into hundreds of green technologies that could reduce greenhouse gases due to our activities while allowing for an increase in production. These technologies will allow us to reduce the impact not only of our industry but also of other sectors in Canada and around the world. We are an integral part of the solutions based on clean technologies in Canada. However, in order for Canada to really be able to seize this opportunity, it is critical that the federal government take steps in order to deal with the lack of competitiveness in Canada compared to other countries. And I will now give my colleague the floor, Ben Bruni.
The gas industry has experienced reduced investment and investor confidence over the past several years. In particular, U.S. tax and regulatory reforms are drawing investment south of the border. Regulatory uncertainty towards achieving greater market access is challenging investor confidence in Canada, and a number of government policy and regulatory initiatives are being considered that have the potential to further hinder industry competitiveness and job creation. The results have been dramatic. Global upstream oil and gas investment is expected to increase by $56 billion or 6% in 2018. The U.S. alone will see an increase by about 15%. In contrast, Canadian oil and gas investment is expected to decrease from $45 billion down to $43 billion. For oil sands, investment is expected to decrease for the fourth consecutive year. This is a far cry from 2014, when industry investment topped $80 billion. To address these challenges, we recommend that the federal government, number one, allow 100% immediate deductibility of tangible capital investment in a manner consistent with the recent U.S. tax reforms. Number two, introduce emissions-intensive trade-exposed protection of approximately 80% coverage of aggregate costs related to climate policy. Number three, work with industry to jointly examine innovative approaches to financing for small and medium-sized firms in the industry. Fourth, expressly acknowledge Canada's oil and gas sector as not subsidized by confirming that remaining oil and gas tax measures are part of the benchmark system as stated by the Department of Finance in the 2017 Auditor General's report. And finally, build upon the federal government's Generation Energy Council report by adopting a vision for Canadian upstream oil and gas as a supplier of choice in meeting global energy demand. Thank you for this opportunity to present today, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Canadian Council for International Cooperation, Mr. Riley King, Research and Policy Manager. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to testify today. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present on behalf of the Canadian Council for International Cooperation. CCIC is Canada's national coalition of civil society organizations working to end global poverty and promote social justice and human dignity for all. Our 80-plus members include many of Canada's leading international development and humanitarian assistance organizations. Today I want to present on three core themes. First, the relationship between a more competitive economy and a more sustainable society. Second, the key role that charities play in both economic and societal success of Canada. And third, how Canada can apply increased growth to build Canadian leadership in global sustainable development. First of all, in terms of building a competitive economy and a sustainable society, Budget 2019 represents an opportunity for the Government of Canada to increase Canada's competitiveness by creating enhanced conditions for sustainable economic growth and tackling inequality. Recommendations highlighted in the alternative federal budget, to which CCIC contributes, include investing in First Nations infrastructure, closing tax loopholes and tackling tax evasion, investing in childcare, and promoting a rapid and just transition to a low-carbon economy, in line with G7 commitments in 2016 and 2018. To complement these policies, we recommend that the government launch a national commission to generate a comprehensive, costed, whole-of-Canada action plan to align government policy with the Sustainable Development Goals and establish a coherent whole-of-government framework of indicators for meeting and measuring Canada's SDG priorities at home and abroad. We're pleased the Budget 2018 established an SDG unit and resources to support this work. We now need to get the work done. Secondly, the government's support for growth extends to all sectors of the economy, including the charitable sector. Canada's charities employ approximately 2 million Canadians and represent $135 billion or 8.1% of GDP. Moreover, they are a core element of Canada's national identity, contributing to our society as well as our economy. When Canadian charities do well, we all do well. CCIC therefore recommends that the government implement the first three recommendations of the Independent Consultation Panel on the Political Activities of Charities, namely legislative and regulatory reforms by the Canada Revenue Agency to enable charities to contribute to dialogue on and development of public policy. We further recommend that the government engage Canadian charities in a dialogue to modernize Canada's regulatory and legislative framework for the charitable sector. Thirdly, sustainable economic growth is more than an end in itself. It is also an opportunity to advance transformative change at home and abroad. Budget 2018 should use the benefits of current and future economic growth to enhance Canada's global leadership in sustainable development and humanitarian assistance and its global reputational and competitive advantage. Yet today, Canada's invests just 0.26% of gross national income, 26 cents of every $100 in international assistance. In fact, at current funding levels, by the end of 2019, this government will have the lowest average commitment as a percentage of GNI of any Canadian government in half a century. This is below the average of OECD countries and below Canada's own historic average contribution. Just last week, the OECD noted that despite robust economic growth, Canadian aid levels had dropped off in recent years. It recommended Canada scale up its GNI ratio to add weight to its global leadership and advocacy efforts. With this in mind, CCIC recommends that the government increase Canada's spending on global development and humanitarian assistance over 10 years through predictable 15% annual increases to the international assistance envelope. This is in line with Recommendation 85 in last year's Finance Committee report. These resources should be accompanied by new, flexible, diverse, and responsive funding mechanisms suitable for a variety of civil society partners. They should also include measures to target some of the poorest people in the poorest countries, including through a focus on gender equality and women's rights, as well as through growing investments in women's rights organizations and dedicating an increased amount of funding towards climate investment, with 50% of funds going towards climate adaptation. By taking these measures, Budget 2019 will help build a fairer, more sustainable, and safer world for all. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. With the Forest Products Association of Canada, welcome, Joel, Mr. Newhammer, Vice President, International Trade and Transportation. Welcome.
Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you very much for having me here on behalf of the members of the Forest Products Association of Canada, or FPAC. FPAC is the voice of Canadian wood, pulp, and paper producers nationally and internationally. Canada's forest products industry generates $69 billion annually contributing over $21 billion to Canada's GDP. The industry is one of Canada's largest employers, operating in over 600 forest-dependent communities from coast to coast and directly employing 230,000 Canadians across the country. Our sector is one of the largest employers of Indigenous peoples in Canada, working closely with over 1,400 Indigenous-owned forest businesses. The forest products industry is facing several challenges, including, but not limited to, trade disputes, carbon measures, regulatory unpredictability, wood supply uncertainty, and lack of reliable infrastructure to support our transportation system. More critically, federal financing programs and policies must remain predictable, stable, and robust for transformative projects to be successful and to contribute to Canada's carbon reduction targets, contribute to Indigenous and rural communities that depend on the sector, and increase investment to be able to compete effectively in the global marketplace. FPAC has 3 recommendations when it comes to the 2019 budget. I will be making a short statement on each recommendation, and if you would like to know more, you can read our full submission, which is attached with my speaking notes today. Recommendation number 1 is for the Canadian government to continue providing support through programs that support Indigenous peoples and increase their participation in forestry-related opportunities, businesses, careers, and governance. Research and development programs, such as those led by FP Innovations. Programs that help accelerate the development of new forest products, including those that can replace the use of plastic across Canada. And market access programs such as the Canada Wood and Woodworks programs that help increase the sector's presence in the Canadian and international arenas and help develop new markets under free trade agreements. Recommendation number 2 is to help with the uncertainty and challenges related to our sector's ability to compete. FPAC recommends the following: establishing an industry government working group on regulatory competitiveness. This comes back to your last point in the last session, Mr. Easter, I'd love to explore with you in the Q&A if time permits. To address cumulative regulatory burden and access to wood fiber, help eliminate infrastructure bottlenecks and increasingly frequent transportation service interruptions, specifically by allocating capacity to Natural Resources Canada to support the collection, analysis, and distribution of data provided by the railways through the implementation of the Transportation Modernization Act. For the government to address the overall tax burden Canada currently faces. Ensure that during the renegotiation of NAFTA, enhanced trade facilitation and trade remedies are key objectives. Quickly ratify the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, ensuring further access to the Asian market for our industry. Finally, by guaranteeing greater market access for Canadian forest products through the broad network of Canada's trade offices and promoting Brand Canada around the world. The third recommendation is for the Canadian federal government to collaborate with provincial governments, Indigenous communities, other rights holders and stakeholders to develop an action plan to ensure healthy and resilient forests support workers and their communities going forward. To address the impacts of climate change, species at risk populations, and ensure resilient forests for future generations, our approach to forest management needs to evolve and innovate. FPAC is advocating for the establishment of a national dialogue that brings together high-level decision makers from industry, federal, provincial, and municipal governments, Indigenous communities, environmental groups, academia, and research organizations. This Forest Forward dialogue will develop a national call to action addressing challenges, opportunities, and recommendations for the forest ecosystem, forest management, and forest operations. Through innovative practices and active forest management, the forest sector is part of the solution to regenerate habitats, reduce fire hazard, and increase carbon storage in the forests and in renewable products. FPAC also believes it is important for the federal government to provide a mandate to safety-sensitive workplaces like ours to be able to test employees in relation to the upcoming legalization of cannabis. In conclusion, the forest products sector is a key driver for the Canadian economy, and it is an imperative that the government prioritize action to assist in its continuing growth. Our 2019 budget recommendations will help ensure that businesses in our industry are reaching their goals for expansion, innovation, and prosperity to better contribute to the success of the over 230,000 workers directly employed in our sector. Recently, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Minister Navdeep Bains announced a report called Resources of the Future. This report underlies the importance of natural resources and their role in the future economy and making Canada more competitive. FPAC strongly supports this report and its recommendations. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joel. With the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada, Mr. Savoy, CEO. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, chers députés. Cœur et AVC.
Members, Heart and Stroke Canada is involved across the country, and our mission is to promote health, to save lives, and to promote recovery for all of our citizens. Cooperating with the federal government has the greatest importance to us and allows us to move forward significant objectives. We have focused on 3 immediate measures that must be taken into immediately to improve the health of our population. A healthy living fund that is financed by the federal government, access to pharmacare that is universal, and a national commitment to women's health.
Fund is necessary because of the alarming and growing rates of chronic diseases throughout Canada. This epidemic is a time bomb for federal and provincial governments' expenditures in health. In this context, Canada's healthy eating strategy is a very necessary step, and we look forward to Health Canada's completion of the implementation of the strategy consistent with the government's mandate. But we need to build beyond the current building blocks of the healthy eating strategy. Important new initiatives that need to be funded through a healthy living fund include vegetable and fruit subsidies, universal school healthy lunch programs, and improvements to the food security programs that serve the Indigenous populations in Canada's north. These could have significant impacts in terms of improved health and the productivity of our economy. To be cost neutral, a healthy living fund should be financed by a levy on the manufacturers of sugary drinks, these drinks being the main contributor to excess sugar consumption in our diet. It is estimated that such a levy could generate $1.7 billion a year in revenue. In this levy should be an excise tax based on volume, and it should increase at the rate of the amount of free sugars per unit as done elsewhere in the world. This levy could postpone 13,000 deaths and save 500,000 disability adjusted life years, therefore enabling more productivity in our workforce. And collectively, these changes could save almost $7.3 million in health care costs over 25 years. The Healthy Living Fund would be cost neutral and would be enabled by the levy that I have just discussed. Pour gérer les maladies chroniques au pays,
in order to manage chronic illnesses in the country, a drug insurance plan that is universal and fair is critical to improve compliance with therapy, shorten hospital stays, and reduce the demand for medical services, which would decrease costs for the healthcare system. Given the gender-based analysis that is the type that is carried out by the government, we know that women are particularly affected by difficult access to medication and by an absence of coverage. Across the country, we have seen that young women, low-income families, Indigenous women, people and women have trouble paying for the medications that they need. So we're asking the federal government to allocate funds to implement a national pharmacare program that is fair and universal. This implementation must be carried out in cooperation with the provincial governments and Indigenous people. It also has to allow access for effective medication that is not costly and needed by citizens, regardless of where they live, their gender, their age, or their ability to pay. It also must allow for improvements to be brought to health, uninsured health care programs in this country for Aboriginal people.
Women is important. Heart disease is the leading cause of premature mortality among women in Canada. And for women who survive stroke, they have worse outcomes than men. We need significant resources to address the systemic issues that have resulted in women being under-researched, under-diagnosed, under-treated, under-supported, and under-aware of both heart disease and stroke. System change will take time, and while we're advocating for change at all levels, we first need to hear more from those that are directly affected by heart disease and stroke. and we seek to lead a nationwide program to engage women to share their experience and build solutions around the health-based inequities they faced. We're therefore calling on the federal government to commit $5 million over 5 years for a nationwide engagement program that can increase women's participation in research and support proper diagnosis and treatment while enhancing information sharing about prevention and risks. Monsieur le Président, chers députés, merci.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am prepared to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Eve. International Institute for Sustainable Development, Mr. Vaughan, President and CEO. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, honourable members, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting us. I'm joined by my colleague Yannick Touchet. I wanted, Mr. Chair, to focus my brief remarks this morning on 3 recommendations contained in the recent report of the Green Budget Coalition, of which IISD is a member. That report is entitled Recommendations for Budget 2019. The 3 priorities I'll mention are sustainable agriculture, freshwater stewardship, and subsidy reform. Honourable members will recall that a key focus of the Barton reports centred on opportunities for Canada as a global leader in agricultural production and international trade. Those reports underscored the importance of increasing investments in agricultural innovation, productivity enhancement, digital and open data tools. Those investments, according to the Barton reports, could help move Canada from its current ranking as the world's 7th largest agricultural exporter to the world's 2nd largest. We believe that an important part of that ambitious agricultural innovation agenda includes sustainable agriculture. Evidence shows that global demand for sustainable agriculture is growing. ISD colleagues track global trends in sustainable commodity production, third-party sustainability certification, and trade on an ongoing basis. To illustrate, roughly 1/3 of the current $9 billion global palm oil market, it conforms to some sustainability standards. 40% of the coffee that we consume has some kind of third-party sustainability standard. Earlier this year, the World Economic Forum and ISD examined trends and emerging opportunities in global agricultural supply chains and sustainability standards. Especially since the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement, there is greater convergence of a demand-side pull from consumers wanting greater choices that embed organic, fair trade, sustainable and climate-smart values, with supply-side push from growers, distributors to include sustainability choices. Trade agreements like the WTO, Mercosur, CETA, and others could and should have a bigger role in supporting this convergence through tools like mutual recognition, equivalency of different standards. Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to share the reports I've just mentioned with members of the committee through the clerk, but in light of these trends, we encourage increased investments in federal agri-environmental programs, as well as investments in research and development in environmentally sustainable agriculture, as well as ways to reduce food waste. Second, Mr. Chair, freshwater stewardship. ISD is proud to run the Experimental Lakes area, which marks its 50th anniversary in 2018. It's important that federal government continue working with different jurisdictions and communities across Canada, both to address well-known problems like non-point phosphorus, chemical and other pollution, as well as emerging challenges facing lakes, rivers throughout the country associated with climate impacts, changing hydrological cycles. We therefore encourage investments that anticipate and respond to climate-related effects on Canada's freshwater systems, as well as investments for aquatic restoration, including working with farmers in protecting and restoring wetlands. Finally, subsidies. For over a decade, ISD has worked to identify and eliminate subsidies that support largely indirectly through tax treatment fossil fuels. While the cost to implement Canada's promise at the 2009 G20 Pittsburgh Summit of phasing out all of these subsidies is small, the direct and indirect savings measured in avoided greenhouse gas emissions, public health benefits, and others are substantial. We welcome progress by successful federal governments in sunsetting several fossil fuel subsidies over the past decade. We encourage more action to reach or exceed the 2009 target of 2025 of eliminating all inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Transparency plays a crucial role in reforming fossil fuel subsidies, a view underscored by the Auditor General. As the government begins an international peer review process of its fossil fuel subsidies, we look forward to better accounting transparency. Given my colleagues' work with other governments across the world involved in a subsidy peer review process, we'd be pleased to share our experience with the Department of Finance in this process. Mr. Chair, colleagues, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Then the last panelist on this panel, National Association of Career Colleges, Mr. Bai, CEO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the National Association of Career Colleges. Being part of the panel is always interesting, as you can see. I can promise I will not offer to eliminate the subsidies of one of my colleagues at this table. We'd like to talk about education and post-secondary training in this presentation, and I want to talk about the single mom that is trying to re-enter the workforce in her mid-30s, of a middle-aged man who lost his job to automation and new technologies, a new immigrant to Canada whose credentials were not fully recognized. Well, for nearly 200 years since before Confederation, regulated career colleges have helped people in situations like those get the skills they need to get better jobs. And today, with over 175,000 students who have chosen to attend one of Canada's many regulated career colleges, that's each year. Those colleges are found in regions across Canada, and indeed in many of the ridings that you represent. And just for the fun of this, Mr. Chair, I'm going to concentrate on Mr. Freges Katos. I believe you've got 3 of our colleges in your riding, from Maddox and Westerveld, as an example. It's been in existence for over 120 years. To make sure I choose all parties, Mr. Richards, you have one college in Airdrie in your riding, the Academy of Learning, and Mr. Julian as well. You have Sprott Shaw, which is very well recognized in British Columbia. So we have colleges throughout the country that are training and retraining students, which are very different than the students attending public colleges and universities. According to a recent study done by Career Colleges Ontario, our provincial arm in Ontario, more than half of our students have previously attended another post-secondary institution. Nearly 70% are women, compared to 50% at public colleges. 57% of our students are over 30, compared to 10% at public colleges. It shows the different demographics and the different clientele, if I can use the term, that we're touching. More information is available in the brief that we submitted, at least one version of the brief, because I understand that we sent a brief in August, which has been distributed as part of your process. We had sent a lengthier brief, which I just got informed was not distributed. Hopefully it does get distributed after. Thank you for the clerk for pointing that out. I appreciate that. We had translated it, but our schools are strictly regulated by individual provinces, which include approval and frequent review of curriculum and instructors, disclosure of financial information, and more. Many programs offered at career colleges are accredited by third parties, such as the Law Society of Upper Canada, the Canadian Medical Association. Our colleges are uniquely positioned to help support Canada's Indigenous communities, including offering on-site training, short-term and focused programs, and flexible learning environment. Example of our work with those communities and stories of our graduate successes can be found in a version of the brief we provided, I think the last one. There is no one in this room that needs to be convinced of the importance of education. When taking into consideration Canada's economic growth and competitiveness, the importance is magnified. The federal government and other third parties have identified various sectors as potentially having future skills gap, meaning that there may not be enough qualified in the near future. Much of this is due to automation and new technologies. More and more Canadians are turning to retraining in order to re-enter the workforce and upgrade their skills and qualification, and regulated career colleges are well placed to help those individuals. Through condensed programs that are easily adapted to meet market demand, provincial government oversight, and the history of student success, our schools are the right choice for many students. Currently, government support is available to students who attend programs 60 weeks and longer. But if they choose the same program accredited by the same bodies that is less than 60 weeks in length, the same level of support is not available. This seems to run counter to the government's objective. While the federal government has made skills development a priority, we believe that the support needs to be expanded to include more options for retraining, such as regulated career colleges, especially for condensed programs, those under 60 weeks. More Canadians are choosing to upgrade their skills and qualification, and they will help the workforce of tomorrow, helping grow Canada's economy and make us more competitive. We have seen across many sectors that the lack of qualified personnel is already having a profound impact on Canada's economy. In specific cases, it is clear there are not enough qualified people to fill available jobs. Domestic retraining is one way to solve this dilemma. Another is international students. Canada has always been proud of its international reputation. Hundreds of thousands of tourists flock to our attractions each year, and it should come as no surprise that our academic institutions are frequently sought by international students. Many international students choose schools in Canada based on the quality of the program.
I get you to just slow down a little.
The translation?
You're going pretty fast, and it's hard to translate.
Great. Many international students choose schools in Canada based on the quality of programs, study time, and ability to work following graduation through the postgraduate work permit program. However, currently, international students attending regulated career colleges are not eligible to access this program, as their counterparts in public institutions are. This policy seems to run counter to the government's objective: fill existing skills gap, bring more immigrants to Canada. The reality is that those graduates are well placed to help Canada succeed. Who better to fill those jobs than people who have trained here and experienced Canadian life? If we want to grow a successful economy, we will need trained newcomers. Enabling international students attending regulated career colleges to benefit from the postgraduate work permit program will support Canada's objectives. And I want to recognize the work done by Citizenship and Immigration, or Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, but more needs to be done and quicker. Ensuring equal access to the postgraduate work permit for all international students attending designated institutions, including regulated career colleges, would help grow Canada's economy and help the government achieve its goal. Students across the country choose to attend regulated career colleges for many reasons: flexibility, smaller class size, targeted skills development, and more. They should be supported and helped, not hindered with policies that run counter to their objective. Not offering those students the same opportunities as those attending public institutions is unfair and is counterproductive to Canada's economic competitiveness. Working together to support our students today will mean a greater benefit tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bai, and thank you all for your presentations. Turning to Mr. Fragasakis for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. My first question goes to Mr. Riley King. I'm very sympathetic when it comes to point 7. I have a huge interest in international development and have for some time, and I know very well who Lester Pearson was. And when I think of point 7, I think all Canadians think of his leadership. At the same time, I wonder if there's other ways to encourage an increase to overseas development assistance. Now, on an annual basis, as you know, we're giving around $5 billion a year. But remittances total, on average, per year, $24 billion. So $24 billion is sent by Canadians to their country of origin, to family members in need, who find themselves in poverty, who find themselves certainly in difficult situations, if not outright poverty. And what some observers have said is that instead of focusing on point 7 and getting to that goal, as laudable as that is, are there not other ways to get to the same outcome? To be more specific, rather, it costs to transfer a remittance sometimes up to 17%. So firms who are the middleman, if you like, are charging sometimes up to 17% to transfer those fees. The G8, or the then G8 in 2009, said that the number should be 5%. And sometimes it is, but quite often it's not. So I wonder if you have anything to say on that.
Certainly. I think it's both, actually, and maybe a little bit more. official development assistance is the most immediate source of revenue, if you want, or funding for reducing poverty, for tackling inequality, for ensuring that we leave no one behind. The sorts of investments that we need to make in tackling poverty aren't going to come from other sources of finance. And so I think ODA, official development assistance, is still a key resource for tackling that, for tackling inequality. But I agree with you fully that there's other sources of finance that we need to add to this mix. We know that it's going to cost trillions of dollars to realize the Sustainable Development Goals. But so we need to think about remittances. How can we reduce the amount of transfer fees that individuals are paying? But remittances, I think, are also a conscious choice by an individual to use migration as a source of income for their family. The Philippines, for example, that's sort of their biggest export is their people, but that comes at a social cost to the individuals, the children, the families that they leave behind. Hopefully this week when Prime Minister Trudeau speaks to the United Nations, he'll talk about other initiatives, including how might we direct some of our pension funds? How can we start directing more foreign direct investment towards developing countries and countries that need it?
Thank you very much. It's all about incentives, and you know, when you have a 17% commission, it doesn't offer much of an incentive to give back, and certainly the Philippines is a good example. When it comes to remittances, the countries in order are China, India, and the Philippines. That's where new Canadians are sending back money most to. And yes, they've left, but it's our gain. They're here, they're working here, and offering an incentive to them so they can send money back to those in need. I think that ought to be on the table, particularly in light of the fact that getting to 0.7 would be very, very expensive. Again, as laudable of a goal as that is. I have about 3 minutes left, so I wanted to ask Mr. Savoy. You talked about pharmacare, and on this committee we are talking about competitiveness. That's our focus. Traditionally, you know, if you asked an economist, what does competitiveness mean? How do we boost it? They would talk about tax cuts, and they would talk about less regulation, less burdens, less red tape. You talked about pharmacare in your brief. You've mentioned it here today. Is it proper to understand pharmacare from a competitiveness perspective? Is it important from that angle? Talk about its value for Canadians from an economic perspective and what it can add to our society.
Well, I think my first comment would about 2 million Canadians are inadequately or not insured, and a good portion of those Canadians are the growing number of Canadians who are precariously employed. So they might be self-employed in a small enterprise, or they might be employed in a low-wage job where there are no benefits that accompany their work, split shifts, those kinds of environments. And they, even young people, might need to have recourse to medication because they're not insured and they're a low-wage earner. They might forego a prescription, and the common cold becomes pneumonia. And there you have the link, I would say, between health and productivity. We need a healthy workforce to have a productive economy, and we can't afford to have 2 million Canadians who are inadequately insured or are not insured at all. So I think the point here is not to eliminate private insurers, but it's to make sure that the government palliate this gap with 2 million uninsured, and that the floor, the level of public insurance, is raised up. So of the 200 schemes, public insurance schemes for medication in Canada, there's 200 of them. The ones that provide the less coverage cover only 1,200 drugs, while the best schemes for people who have good jobs provide coverage for up to 5,000 drugs. So the reality is closing those gaps, especially for people who are precariously employed and for people who are self-employed in small firms, the incubators, the innovators, the people who are setting up enterprises in their garages, they're the people who we can't allow to forego medication.
Thank you very much. My last question, more of a point, I suppose, to Mr. Bai, and thank you for mentioning the colleges in London. We certainly appreciate the work that they do. On automation, though, there is as you I'm sure know, debates on the numbers. And so some studies have suggested that up to maybe close to 40% of jobs in industrialized democracies like Canada could be lost due to automation. But the OECD just a few months ago said that, in a report published in April, said that the number is probably close to 10%. So if we're going to focus on automation, as we should, we need to know the numbers. And would you acknowledge that there's no agreement on the numbers right now as far as the number of jobs that could be lost?
I think you're entirely right. There is no agreement on the numbers, but there is a full agreement that the workforce of tomorrow is changing. So automation is going to bring changes and need for retraining. And the people that will not want to retrain or will not be able to retrain will lose their jobs because they will need to upgrade their skills in view of the influx of technologies and robotization and artificial intelligence into their workforce.
No, I think we're on the same page there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Mr. Polyev, 7
Sorry,
minutes.
it's Mr. Richards.
Oh, Mr. Richards, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Start, Mr. Neuheimer from the Forest Products Association. You in your opening had talked a little bit about concerns with certainty in terms of regulation, and you had mentioned in specific when you talked about that the importance of predictability, and then you had also mentioned about a working group that you were sort of suggesting, which would be an industry government, I guess, cooperative working group. Can you give us a bit more detail on how you think that would look, how that would work, and what you think that would accomplish?
Yes, sure. Thanks for the excellent question. Before I begin, I just want to wish everyone a happy Forest Week across Canada, celebrating all the great social and economic and environmental contributions the forest industry makes right across Canada. Actually, I think your question fits very nicely, actually, with the point that Mr. Easter was asking about, actually, at the last session, sort of like we've done a lot of work on trying to harmonize regulations and simplify regulations and make them smart regulations. And I mentioned specifically the government's initiative that's just reported out, the Resources of the Future initiative. We support that. And that's an example that I think we should be doing more of. And so what I'm encouraging all of you to do is do more of that on an ongoing basis. You know, don't make these one-off things. Don't wait until the 2020 pre-budget submission process to ask the question again. Keep this going. Keep business leaders, keep societal leaders engaged in those kind of processes, so that once you've identified your recommendations, you stick to it, and you're very determined to action whatever those recommendations are. So have CEO leadership there, have the leaders of Indigenous communities there, have other leaders from communities there, basically to make sure that you can go ahead as governments and make those changes. I mean, those are actually absolutely mission critical. If we don't do that, if we don't get better at this, we're going to lose out to our international competition, and we don't want that. We want sectors like ours to continue to help pay the bills, including for all the great social programming that Canada does. So basically what I would recommend in response to your question is keep those leaders engaged from business and Indigenous and communities, and make it happen once you've identified the right recommendations. Thanks for your question.
Sure, no problem. Just to kind of follow up on that a little bit further, I mean, it was mentioned some earlier in the earlier panel about the idea of, some of the overlap that happens between different levels of government. So I would assume that would be something you would agree that we need to sort of look at, making sure that, processes, regulatory processes, aren't sort of overlapping with each other and duplicating. That's one part of it. The second part is one of the things I think that isn't often done is looking at regulations that maybe have become redundant or things like that. What would your recommendation be in terms of looking at that and making sure that we're, not just always creating new regulation, but finding ways to review regulation and determine what might not be necessary any longer?
Well, that's also a good question. Thank you very much for that this morning. I mean, two quick examples. On the forestry management side of things, there's a huge overlap, and there's a sometimes very uncomfortable partnership between the federal government and the provinces when it comes to administering the sustainable forest management rules and goals that we have right across Canada. That's something that we quite frankly need to do a better job of, especially when you look at some of the work that's taking place right now on species at risk. There's a lot of very valuable knowledge when it comes to species at risk that lives in the provinces. And if the federal, level of government is going to do anything when it comes to an issue like that, you need to make sure you're taking the full advantage of that knowledge that exists in the provinces without trying to reinvent the wheel, quite frankly. My second example, I think, is also a very urgent example like the first one. It's the truck driver shortage in Canada. Many businesses like ours struggle on an ongoing basis to get the rail service that they need. We're located in rural and remote communities. The nearest railway is hundreds of kilometers away typically. That can be very problematic. And then, when you need to turn to a truck, you have a tough time getting one. And there are so few truck drivers, that drives up the cost as well. So again, in the federal and the provincial scene, there's a disconnect. The provinces have most of the power there, but there's an urgent issue for business to fix or ease the truck driver shortage. Surely the leaders at the federal and the provincial level could get together and do more rapidly to help with education and training to make it easier to bring people on to drive trucks, or maybe via immigration. So in any case, I hope those two examples were sort of what you were looking for.
It just kind of occurred to me when you talked about the truck driver shortage, is that one of those cases where, and I might have our friends in CAP comment on regulatory processes as well, because I would imagine they would have some concerns here. But is that one of those cases where, like we've got such difficulty with some of the processes, and certainly with Bill C-69, it's just going to get worse, that what happens is you can't get pipelines built, therefore rail is being used to ship oil, therefore it's displacing other products from being able to be on rail, and then you've got an issue, you're saying, with truck driver shortages. So is this one of those things where it just kind of cascades down? Would that be your thoughts on that, Mr. Newheimer? Or?
Well, oil and gas is a bit different than forest products, so I don't think truck is really for the volumes you need to ship, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's...
I guess what I'm getting at here is that when it displaces, because you can't get pipelines, or displacing other things because oil is being shipped by rail, and therefore am I imagining that, or does that sound...
Now I understand the question. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's a huge problem. I just read a couple of weeks ago in the Globe and Mail that CN's shipping 50% more crude, last quarter than it did the previous quarter. I'm very, very happy for that railway that's part of their business. But as soon as you start reading things like that, that causes even heightened, anxiety in our sector and other sectors that basically need that capacity in the rail system, quite frankly. And so, if we had some pipeline options, that would certainly benefit us on the rail side in our business, and it would also ease the pressure with the truck situation that we talked about. So, absolutely right.
That's it?
Yep, that's it. Okay. That's 7 minutes. Mr. Julian, but just so we're clear, I think you were saying on the last point that because capacity on railway is taken for oil because there's no pipelines, therefore there's less ability to move other products by rail and truck, right?
Well, it certainly reduces the capacity that's available to us and other sectors like mining, for example. Yes, it does, unfortunately, which is too bad, because the Canadian economy suffers and the communities that depend on those industries suffer, which is, we need to fix that. We need to do better on that one.
Mr. Julian, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to go to you as well, Mr. Newheimer. I represent a riding that after the Softwood lumber sellout was signed, lost 2,000 direct and indirect jobs. We lost Canfor, Interfor, and Western Forest Products. All went down within 6 months of the softwood lumber sellout, and the sector has never recovered. In my area of British Columbia, what we had and where my father worked in Fraser Mills, which used to be a very vibrant wood production facility, it's now this parking lot for raw log exports. So where hundreds of people worked before, and there's just a handful of people working now. So the sector, to my mind, when I see my high school buddies that worked in the wood sector and are no longer working there because of bad government policy, I understand your call for let's putting into place smart government policy so that rather than killing those jobs, we're actually building a vibrant forest products sector. So I'd like to come to your points around market access and research and development. You're indicating a request for $22.5 million a year for market access. That sounds to me to be the minimum, really. When we look at other international trading partners, they invest many, many times more in export promotion support than Canada does. We do a lamentably bad job on that. So I would like you to comment on the market access funding. How much was received last year to support wood products export? And this year you're asking for 22.5. And then secondly, research and development. Canada's last in the industrialized world when it comes to the production of patents, production of doctorates. We have done a very poor job in terms of research and development. How important is that to actually put in place innovation funding so that Canada can actually compete with the kind of research and development that we're currently not doing?
Right. Well, thank you very much for the question. I think if you broke it down into 3 buckets, it would be useful to help respond to your question. If you had in bucket 1 research and development activities and investment, bucket 2 basically taking those new technologies and de-risking, sort of the risk of taking them to the marketplace. And then the last one is actually out there in the marketplace promoting them. Those are the 3 buckets I think that are very, very important for us that hopefully you see reflected in the submission. People know us for the dimensional lumber we've made for the last 100 years. What we're really determined to do is to get people to know about the products, the new forest products that we want to make, engineered wood products, much more sophisticated, much stronger than 2x4s. So we really, as part of the partnership we're asking here for this morning, we want to basically put these new forest products, their development, their export to overseas markets on steroids, so that we sort of get, those old forest products are great, they're great money makers, but it's this transition that we want to make to these new forest products and take those forest products to the markets. For the overseas market development last year, I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 million of funding we received. Don't forget it's a partnership, so the industry is also putting up its own $7 million. It's kind of 50 cent dollars, as sometimes it's referred to. So it's a partnership when you look at those investments. And, with the uncertainty of our, best trading partner to the south right now, going into Asia, more deeply and with these newer products that I'm talking about is more important than ever before. Don't forget there also, and this kind of goes into the bill that your colleague Mr. Canning's had great success with passing in the last session, using more wood, because we really believe that wood is part of the solution to the GHG challenge. So again, that's a great opportunity to get into those markets and help those countries reduce their greenhouse gases.
Thank you very much for that. And I'd just like to note $7 million a year last year for market access. The U.S. cattle industry alone, in terms of U.S. government support, is about $60 million a year. And for the European community to support their wine exports, about $120 million. So we're talking about one of our major industries where we're giving peanuts compared to what our major competitors are. So thank you for that. I'd like to go on to you, Mr. Savoy. The whole issue of the excise tax, we had a debate in this committee about an excise tax that's now being imposed by the federal government on medical cannabis, which many people are reacting very badly to, understandably. It cuts down access to medical marijuana that people need for pain management. What you're proposing is an excise tax on sugary drinks, and I don't think anyone would defend sugary drinks. The health impacts, as your brief indicates, are significant. To what extent do you think we could shift, by putting that excess tax in place, shift the ability of Canadian low-income consumers to actually access good food, which is a major problem, as you know?
Well, there's 2 aspects. There is obviously the impact of the tax, which will cause substitution. We've seen it in Mexico. They've introduced an excise tax on sugar, and people are switching. And because sugary drinks have no nutritional value, in fact, for low-income families, switching to tap water is actually probably the best choice. But there are obviously other choices. Cow's milk, unsweetened almond or other milk substitutes are also attractive. But I actually think that the most important aspect is the fund that would be created through the levy, which would have as its focus to help deal with issues of food insecurity. If I just think, for instance, as subsidies for whole fruits and vegetables, that think about it as a voucher or a prescription for the healthy foods in the grocery, then you're actually helping to address one of the fundamental issues, which is that people who have lower income have the worst health outcomes. And this is one of the most, when we think about the social determinants of health, we know that lower socioeconomic status is among the most intractable things to change. And it impacts mortality and it impacts quality of life. So if you actually implement things like healthy foods in schools for all children, you're actually addressing these questions in a way that palliate for the impact of lower socioeconomic status. So you get both substitution and you get the benefits of the expenditures through the fund created by the excise tax.
I'm sorry, we'll have to end it there. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to continue that discussion. I represent Northwest Territories, and I really welcome this discussion. I think this is an issue that has to be brought to the forefront. When I grew up in a small Aboriginal community, almost everybody drank pop. And I still live in an Aboriginal community. Almost everybody drinks pop. And a lot of people that I went to school with, when it was lunchtime, that's what they had for lunch, was pop and chips. Because there's really nothing else. So this is a big issue. We still see barge loads of pop heading north. And that, I mean, the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, Yukon. And if you could imagine barge loads big as this room with cases of pop stacked. And that's not going to last the whole winter. So it is a big issue. Some of our ministers in the northern governments have stated that they would like to introduce some kind of levy. They're looking at doing more consultation. And we all recognize that we have to address the issue of heart disease and obesity. But at the same time, there is a concern that will overly penalize the poorest in our territory. And they have a lot of times limited options. And in some communities, you're not going to turn that tap water on and drink it. I challenge some of you to come and try to drink some of our tap water. There is a very big challenge when we try to get healthy foods in our communities. Does that mean we're going to start bringing more planes, fly more food in? I don't know how that's going to work, but it's almost a double whammy. If we're going to bring in this levy, then how do we find a substitute in the north? I know in the south it'll be a lot easier. In the north, we're talking about a huge challenge. And the addiction to pop is probably per capita the highest in this country, in the north.
Let me just say, cardiovascular disease among Indigenous populations, the rates are twice what they are in the average population, as well as you well know. It's a major priority for heart and stroke. You probably know in communities where there's no access to fresh water, people say an excise tax will be a real issue. But let's remember that some of the bottling companies that bottle soda pop also sell water, and for the same volume. So if you think the bottle of Dasani water or the bottle of Coca-Cola, the bottle of Dasani water on reserve will be 30% more expensive than the bottle of pop. And the cost base is actually cheaper for the Coca-Cola because there's added sugar and syrup in it, and the bottle of water is just water. So the excise tax would not only invite switching to the bottle of water, which is today more expensive, so it reinforces the pattern about which you speak. But I think the most important thing, again, is the fund that would be created would provide resources to improve programs such as the programs that allow northern Indigenous communities to have better access to better food. And this has to be a priority. And this is the opportunity that's available in the excise tax, is to make it a priority to actually repair the situation that you illustrate. So I share with you in making that an urgent priority through the healthy fund that would be created by the excise tax.
Yeah. Thank you for that. My next question is to the CAP. The issue of offshore has been a big one in Northwest Territories, Beaufort Sea, and the opening and reduction of sea ice, and so that has allowed more ships to come through, and there's all kinds of concerns over the lack of navigational aids. But it's also an issue with the oil industry because we have a lot of permits are out there, but we don't have a plan for oil spill cleanup. We don't have a port in the Beaufort Sea in any of the communities or in that area at all. We have no Coast Guard presence. We have no navigational aid. You're not going to find a buoy anywhere in the Beaufort Sea. I think last year or 2 years ago we had 70 ships come through, and we had one that got hung up, and we're lucky it got pulled off safely. We also had fuel barges that were stranded because they went into shallow water. And we have offloading of fuel barges onto other fuel barges where we're just asking for trouble because anything could happen. I wanted to know if you could tell us what would it take to make it a more welcoming place for the oil industry to come and do more exploration. Is it more infrastructure? Is it navigation system? Is it is it all of the above? Maybe you could give me some insight what the industry is thinking.
Thank you for the question. It's a good discussion. We view the northern opportunity as largely more of a nascent industry. There really isn't a strong level of production. There really isn't any. There are a number of challenges that exist accessing that resource. You've listed actually quite many. Foundationally, there needs to be the supporting infrastructure and programs that are in place to establish that framework for oil and gas companies to develop their northern leases. There also needs to be a willingness from the federal government to prioritize this as an area for development. It's largely when we're in a situation where we've got a high quality resource but really limited access to it, and some really relatively significant risk in terms of accessing that resource driven by the conditions of the area. Groups need to come together collaboratively to find ways to reduce that risk, reduce and eliminate it. On some of that part would be on the design and the protocols and procedures of the industry, but we would also need a component from the federal government to enable that and create the supporting services and infrastructure that would position the investment to, one, manage the risk, and two, be profitable, and three, of course, deliver the local benefits.
Thank you. Thank you all. Before I turn to Mr. Van Kesteren, to cap as well, what's your estimate of the Alberta discount, because we don't have access to other markets other than the United States? And secondly, I want to kind of bridge this gap between the subsidy issue. Mr. Vaughan for the International Institute for Sustainable Development is saying that working to identify and eliminate subsidies, largely indirect subsidies through tax treatment to fossil fuels, which is you guys. And you're saying that CAP firmly disagrees with the current views on what constitutes a subsidy. So how are we going to bridge that gap? Who wants to start?
I'm happy to
okay.
Engage in this discussion. So I'll start with the subsidy discussion, and then perhaps we can get into the market access, some of those competitiveness challenges, if you will. So certainly appreciate the subsidy discussion. It's a good opportunity to really understand the various issues. As far back as 2000, the federal government has been examining whether fossil fuel producers receive preferable tax treatment when compared to, say, the renewable sector. And in particular, the Commissioner for the Environment and Sustainable Development at the time concluded, and I quote, "Overall, we found that with a few exceptions, federal government support today for the energy investments, including support through the tax system, does not particularly favor the non-renewable sector over the renewable." However, there is the G20 commitment in 2009 to eliminate inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that, unquote, encourage wasteful consumption and impede investment in energy sources. That's sort of two components to that. The first is the wasteful consumption, and that really focuses on subsidies to consume. Canada doesn't have subsidies to consume. In fact, Canada does the opposite. They tax consumption of fossil fuels at the consumer level. But the G20 commitment looked more closely at that consumption side of things and has actually, we've looked at IEA numbers and ranked countries from consumption subsidies. Canada isn't even on the list. There is one that's interestingly on the list, which is Argentina, which is 9th. And so with the joint sort of audit of subsidies with Canada and Argentina, it will be interesting to see the results that come from that. That said, there's the other side of this sort of subsidy piece, which is impede investment in clean energy resources. Evidence from this government has indicated that tax measures for renewables, such as accelerated capital cost allowance and measures for deducting intangible capital, have received expansions and extensions for the clean resource sector in 2012, 13, 14, 16, and 18. So that side of things where we're talking about impeding investment in clean energy resources, we don't think applies in this instance, largely as a result of government's overt actions to support. Looking at the oil and gas sector, despite the 2000 report from the federal government, we have examined federal government tax reforms over the last number of years and have identified 11 specific tax measures that were removed from 2003 to 2017, including the budget last year, which was the reforms to the CDE program. And as a result, we've seen...
Can you sum up fairly? I had to give Mr. Vaughan a chance, and I'm taking time away from members, so...
The Department of Finance has also affirmed that the existing tax framework for Canadian oil and gas is not subsidized. It was in the 2017 Auditor General's report. So our assessment and analysis here, we think clearly indicates that there is no subsidy issue for the upstream oil and gas side of things. And in fact, we'd like to see the federal government affirm that so that we can move forward to addressing the more pressing challenges, such as GHG reduction, and or eliminating consumption subsidies globally. Thank you.
Mr. Braun, can you bridge the gap?
Very briefly. This has been the debate on the definition has been underway now for over 10 years. It's based on the World Trade Organization definition of what is the subsidy. My colleagues in Geneva, in our Geneva office, have been working on this for over the last 10 years with the OECD, with the International Monetary Fund, with the International Energy Agency. I think for Canada, the story is very good. From the previous government and to this government, there's still residual at the federal level, about $200 million. ACCA is one. Flow-through shares is another. And when you look at both federal and provincial, it's about $2 billion. So within the sort of the global scheme of things, Canada doesn't rank because if you combine up all the subsidies to fossil fuels, it's about $500 billion a year. And that's one of the challenges, both from a treasury draw, but also then from meeting Paris and other targets. So what I just end with is we could go on this for hours, but I know you're not going to let us, but Canada has agreed to do a peer review process where other countries, including the United States, 2 years ago, through their Department of Energy, said, let's sit down and go through each one of the tax measures, measure by measure, and then get to a classification. So I think this is a good story, but Canada hasn't quite able to declare victory.
Okay, gives us some further information, Mr. Van Kesteren.
Thank you, Chair. How much time do I have?
You got 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Boy, I got to tell you, petroleum industry, it's certainly a different tone from when I was in government. And you came to visit us at that time, and it was more you were having asked to assist you to develop the oil sands, and it seems like you're on your heels, and I can understand that with the current government in place. I got a question, and it's a little bit off the cuff, but Mr. Riley King and Mr. Vaughan, who funds your organizations? Go ahead first.
The International Institute of Sustainable Development has been around for about 30 years. Our funding is from different sources, including the Government of Canada, Ontario government, Manitoba government. Our headquarters is in Winnipeg, as well as from the United Kingdom, International Development Agency, Denmark, Germany, as well as from private individuals. We just entered into something called the Circular Economy Leaders Coalition with leading Canadian businesses like Loblaws, IKEA, Unilever, and others. So we have, at any given day, about 100 different funders. We're a charitable not-for-profit, so we have audited statements which we submit to the Canadian Revenue Agency yearly.
So in essence, governments fund you. It's just a little odd. I just find that a little odd. I see the industry coming here and coming to the Finance Committee to enhance their industry and to maybe build our economies, and we've got a government agency that's kind of on the attack. Is that just not a little unfair?
I think what we would argue is that importance of having policy coherence, so that we work very closely, as I've just mentioned, with the business sector, and there are points of where we're still having a difference of perceptions on key measures, but that I think we're all here for the reason that we want the Canadian economy to succeed, Canadian workers to succeed, and it's the devil's in the details on some of the specific measures. Like, can we save the Canadian taxpayer money by putting that allocation elsewhere? And that's up to you. It's not up to us. So we only say things based on evidence.
Mr. Riley King, where's your funding come from?
So about 80% of our funding comes from our members, and the remaining 20% comes from a range of different foundations, but the biggest portion of that is from the International Development Research Centre, which funds a 3-year program in which we're trying to enhance the collaboration between Canadian academics and our members to use greater evidence base to improve the impact of our programs.
Would membership, and I'm just curious because I've not seen a call for membership or anything in that regard. What would a normal member constitute? Would it just the average citizen that reads about your work and just wants to participate?
So our members are around 85 charitable organizations across the country that do work in international development and humanitarian assistance.
So again, those organizations would be active in places like, let's just say, Africa, and
exactly.
So they make sure that they have advocacy at the government level to make sure that their programs are carried out.
Exactly. They're trying to have as much impact for the dollars that they get as possible. Many of our members, as you mentioned, work internationally, but a lot of them also have programs domestically.
Okay, I've been in Africa a number of times, a number of countries as well too. So I'm familiar with those programs. So that's just good to know. Mr. Newheimer, you've had a lot of the floor this morning, and I just wanted to. I was looking for the article, I couldn't find it. Is there a crash in lumber prices in the United States? I thought I read that yesterday. Just scanned over it, and is that going to affect the Canadian industry?
I wouldn't say it's a crash. We've had a little dip in the prices in the last couple of weeks, but it's not a crash. So we're not on the panic button yet. We're not in for a full correction, like we were back in 2007 yet. But, that is the nature of our business. This is very cyclical.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Over to CAP. First question, sorry. Our growth rate in the second quarter rebounded nicely, 2.9% in Canada, the GDP, and a lot of it was due to the energy sector, which is obviously focused in Western Canada and also in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. And our government is supporting energy workers across the country with a number of our policies, including the acquisition of the TMX pipeline. And I think we're on the right trajectory with that. In terms of the accelerated capital cost acceleration, how important is that to the sector? Very quickly, please.
Thank you for the question. The immediate deductibility of capital expenses, 100%, is sort of how we're framing the issue, and it aligns with recent changes in the United States. That is our primary request in addition to the market access support. It actually moves the needle substantially from an investment perspective. It was actually the key lever that was responsible for advancing the development of the oil sands in the 1990s under the Liberal government.
Thank you. And thank you. And with the news yesterday from TRAP that the fourth leg of Keystone XL, I think it's in 2019 that they'll start on that, or it looks like to be in 2019 they'll start on that. I think that will go a long way in reducing the discount between WTI and WSC. which would be great. Moving on to the heart and stroke, the one thing that I've been very cognizant of since becoming an MP is the rate of heart disease and the rate of heart disease among women. Women suffer strokes more often than men do, and it's like, I didn't know that, and then it's one of those kind of facts that you just don't hear about. What can we do to raise awareness, because there is a gender issue when it comes to this issue, in terms of raising awareness for women specifically, and reducing heart disease and the potential for stroke?
Well, let me just say thank you for your question. One of the things that your government has done is to, through the CIHR, is to impose a sex and gender analysis in all of the research that is conducted. So let me just say that I applaud that, because 70% of the research in animal models or in human models is done on males, and too often studies are not powered to actually be able to arrive at conclusions about the other gender. But the awareness issues, I'll just take heart attacks for example. Most people think of heart attacks as presenting with chest pains. Most women experience heart attacks without chest pains, and they will often present with nausea or overheating, and they may, in the emerge, be diagnosed as having had indigestion, for instance, and therefore will get slower access and therefore more permanent damage. So we need to do work to equip both health professionals and women to actually be very proactive in exhausting the pathways that are available to them, and demanding actually that the possibility of a heart attack be eliminated when they're in the emergency setting. This is a really big crisis. And the other thing that is a really big issue is even after diagnosis, so for the male and the female who've had the heart attack, the rate of referral to cardiac rehab and of completion is significantly lower, about 30% lower for women. So from a health system perspective, making sure that the programs are designed in ways that women will adhere and that they are referred, because we know that cardiac rehab has benefits to actually repairing the heart and ensuring that people can live healthy and without permanent damage.
Thank you, sir.
Poilievre, and then the final question to Mr. Amos. Mr. Poilievre.
Yes, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said last year he wanted to phase out the oil sands. And in many respects, he has been succeeding in that objective. Investment in Canada's oil sands was down for a fourth consecutive year this year. When Prime Minister Trudeau took office, 3 of the world's most respected infrastructure companies were planning to build pipelines to Tidewater, and all 3 of them have exited. Enbridge, TransCanada, and Kinder Morgan. All 3 of them have decided to invest elsewhere in other places. Now, this decline is ironic given that oil prices have risen under this government. In other words, one would have expected that market conditions would have caused fortunes for our industry to rise as well. But they have gone in precisely the opposite direction. Do you think your organization is succeeding in having its policy agenda respected by this government?
Well, we've certainly been happy to see some of the changes in the government's policies in ways that are supportive of our industry. We were very happy to see TMX continue, and we're happy with the announcement that ensured that it did go forward.
Sorry, just continue. Has construction begun?
No, it hasn't,
right.
And we look forward to
it beginning. Do you have any idea when it will begin?
No.
The witness has the floor, and I'm surprised nobody on the government side made a point of order, because your interpretation of what the Prime Minister said may be a little different than what was said. Go ahead, Ms. Joseph.
Thank you. So we're pleased to see some of these things moving forward. As we said in our remarks, we're happy that the government has indicated in Generation Energy a commitment to clean oil and gas and a role for Canada in the world. And we certainly want to see more of that and an enhanced discussion from the government of the role that Canada's oil and gas can play in alleviating energy poverty. Are there things that could go further? There are, and we hope to see some improvements on the regulatory front. But we remain committed to a constructive collaboration with the government.
Mr. Pelliot.
So you want the existing policies to go further?
We want the policies that are working well to go further, and we want to fix the policies that could be improved.
Okay. So do you have any estimate as to when construction will begin on the Trans Mountain pipeline?
Well, we know from the announcement, I think there's a 22-week study period, and so we look forward to that proceeding as quickly as possible.
Right. I mean, there is a verifiable outrage among people who work in the sector about the government's layers of taxation and regulation, about vetoing a pipeline to Tidewater that had already been approved, about regulating to death another pipeline which would have taken Western oil to Eastern refineries, and about the government's failure to even begin construction, let alone complete it, on the newly nationalized Trans Mountain pipeline. Do you think there might be a disconnect between oil industry lobbyists in Ottawa and workers and entrepreneurs on the ground?
The oil industry is a diverse sector. Many of our companies and many of their workers are unhappy about what's been going on in the sector in terms of loss of investment, and we certainly hope the committee understands that there is an issue with competitiveness that is causing loss of investment, and there are important policy changes we hope this government will bring to address those. And that's what we're here to do. We understand what's going on in our sector. There's no disconnect between us and the sector.
One final point you want to make, Pierre?
No.
Okay, Mr. Amos. Last, we'll go 4 minutes. We'll be a little bit over.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members for having me join you today. I'd like to invite Mr. Riley King, who I had the pleasure of meeting in New York this summer at the UN SDG meetings, and Mr. Vaughan, who I also had the pleasure of meeting there, to speak to the importance of overseas development assistance in a context of a renewed relationship between Canada and the rest of the world. Obviously, this week is a big one for Canada at the UN, and discussions are well underway around Canada's campaign to secure a seat for the Security Council, which the previous government failed to do miserably. So I wonder if you could comment on the importance of investments in development assistance in that vein.
I think the challenge that the OECD report pointed out, that the report that came out about 10 days ago, is it definitely recognized the strong leadership role that Canada has played globally in advancing gender equality. But it felt that it suggested that there was a disconnect between the good words and the good deeds and the investment that Canada's making. So I think looking ahead to the Security Council seat, if Canada can demonstrate that it can increase the investment for official development assistance to identify other sources of funding for sustainable development, that it will match those leadership of words with leadership in actions.
Yeah, and just very briefly, I think the Prime Minister's comments this week in New York just underscore that the world is looking at how we're going to do with the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the more that Canada, through its development agencies, the embassies, working with the private sector to bring concrete solutions to the ground in developing countries, are critically important beyond the Security Council seat. And so I think the more that Canada engages in this, the better for us all.
Thank you. Chair, if I've got one more minute, I'd love to ask a question, to direct a question to Mr. Savoy, because I don't think Canadians have necessarily heard the Heart and Stroke Foundation's voice on the issue of putting a price on pollution. It's a debate that's clearly an important one. Canadians expect that we're going to protect them. I would anticipate that Heart and Stroke Foundation would be fully on side with measures that will clean Canada's air and help generate fewer air pollution-related deaths and smog-related deaths. So
we haven't taken a position, but the reality is that clean air is important to our respiratory health and to cardiovascular health more broadly. So our focus has been on healthy eating, and that's because the burden of disease related to poor nutrition or to the sins of affluence, meaning eating too much of the wrong foods, in the developed world is the biggest source of mortality. And interestingly, as our friends from the Council for International Development would know, that has now changed in the developing world as well, which is that more mortality comes from overeating the bad foods than from malnutrition. So the food issues have been our focus, but I think your premise is one that I will take back home, if I may.
I would appreciate that, and I think Canadians would like to hear the voice of Heart and Stroke Foundation on the issue of a price on pollution.
I thank you for the suggestion.
Thanks.
I just want to, you asked a question, Chair, on the fuel subsidies, and I do have a response. At the G20, just for clarification, Argentina and Canada, among other countries, agreed back in 2009, I believe, to look at inefficient fuel subsidies. And just in 2016, that was ratified. Canada and Argentina are looking at each other's practices, but there is an agreement writ large on the G20 to look at inefficient fuel subsidies. And I think the word inefficient is important in this conversation, so I just wanted to provide that context.
Okay, that's good to have on the record. Then thank you very much to all the witnesses and also your presentations earlier and answering our questions. With that, meeting adjourned until we do it all again tomorrow. Meeting adjourned.